On the dot, exactly on time, to be half an hour late. Success. Time has come, the walrus said. Talk of many things. Shoes and ships and sealing racks. Cabbages and kings. Why the sea is boiling hot. Whether peaks, wings. I'm gonna wait for the ads to end before we continue with the story. Brr, it's cold. Oh my gosh, remember that song? Is Brr, it's cold in here. What movie? Anyways. Beyond. Chilly. Hope everybody's all warm and deep. I'm not. Oh. Ah. Blanket on me. Have the ads ended? Are you still playing the game? At least you're listening in. Yes. The ads are starting in 30? Ugh. Those of you tuning in then, if you rush to get to this, we're gonna wait until the ads have ended. Don't miss stuff. I don't know if anyone's already tuned in. I know I'm starting a bit late today. Feeling a bit tight. I can't even read what's going on because my phone was. Can you tell if anyone? Can you tell if anyone's? No. If anybody has tuned in already, you can tell. I tell you. But like for reals. And as they feel, I'm not sure. I know must be wrong. Never I hear the sound. There's a over. I never I knew I is it over yet? I don't think. Oh sweet. What do we do with eh? Cat's play. Page flipping noise, ASMR. And that. That's satisfying noise. Hero, is it over yet? Gosh. Oh no. Just all alone. Nothing to do. Waiting on the ant stand. Oh, thank goodness. Okay. So last we left off with Narnia. We were reading The Horse and His Boy, and we were currently following the perspective of, oh, her name, Larceline, and that was Aravis. There was where they had Aravis had planned to sneak out of the, I guess it would be a palace at this point, and while doing so, they had unfortunately run across the Tisroc and his men speaking in a secluded room off to the about how. Yeah, so we continue with that. So chapter 8, in the house of the Tisroc. Oh, my father, and oh, to the delight of my eyes, began the young man, muttering his words very quickly and silkily, and not at all as if the Tisroc were the delight of his eyes. May you live forever, but you have utterly destroyed me. If you had given me the swiftest of the galleys at sunrise, when I first saw the ship of the accursed barbarians was gone from her place, I would perhaps have overtaken them. But you persuaded me to send first and see if they had not merely moved round to the point into better anchorage. And now the whole day has been wasted, and they are gone, out of my reach. The false jade, And here he added a great many descriptions of Queen Susan, which would not look at all nice in print. For of course this young man was Prince Rabadash, and of course the false jade was Susan of Narnia. Compose yourself, O my son, said the Tisroc, for the departure of guests makes a wound that is easily healed in the heart of a judicious host. But I want her, cried the prince. I must have her. I shall die if I do not get her. False, proud, black-haired daughter of a dog that she is. I cannot sleep, and my food has no savor, and my eyes are darkened because of her beauty. I must have the barbarian queen. How well it was said by a gifted poet, observed the vizier, raising his face, in a somewhat dusty condition, from the carpet, that deep draughts from the fountain of reason are desirable in order to extinguish the fire of youthful love. This seemed to exasperate the prince. Dog, he shouted, directing a series of well-aimed kicks at the hindquarters of the vizier. Do not dare to quote the poets to me. I have had maxims and verses flung at me all day, and I can adorn them no more. I'm afraid Aravis did not feel at all sorry for the vizier. The Tisroc was apparently sunk in thought, but when, after a long pause, he noticed what was happening, he said tranquilly, My son, by all means desist from kicking the venerable and enlightened vizier, for as a costly jewel retains its value even if hidden in a dunghill, so old age and discretion are to be respected even in the vile persons of our subjects. Desist, therefore, and tell us what you desire and propose. I desire and propose, O my father, said Rapidash, that you immediately call out your invincible armies and invade the thrice accursed land of Narnia and waste it with fire and sword and add it to your illimitable empire, killing their high king and all his blood except the Queen Susan. For I must have her as my wife, though she shall learn a sharp lesson first. Understand, O my son, said the Tisroc, that no words you can speak will move me to open war against Narnia. If you were not my father, O ever-living Tisroc, said the prince, grinding his teeth, I should say that was the word of a coward. And if you were not my son, O most inflammable Rapidash, replied his father, your life would be short and your death slow while you had said it. The cool, placid voice in which he spoke these words made Avarice's blood run cold. But why, O my father, said the prince, this time in a much more respectful voice, why should we think twice about punishing Narnia any more than about hanging an idle slave or sending a worn-out horse to be made into dog meat? Is it not the fourth size of one of your least provinces? 1,000 spears could conquer it in 5 weeks. It is an unseemly blot on the skirts of your empire. Most undoubtedly, said the Tisroc. These little barbarian countries that call themselves free, which is as much to say idle, disordered, and unprofitable, are hateful to the gods and to all persons of discernment. Then why have we suffered such a land as Narnia to remain thus long unsubdued? Know, O enlightened prince, said the vizier, that until the year in which your exalted father began his salutary and unending reign, the land of Narnia was covered with ice and snow, and was moreover ruled by a most powerful enchantress. This I know very well, O loquacious vizier, answered the prince, but I know also that the enchantress is dead, and the ice and snow have vanished, that Narnia is now wholesome, fruitful, and delicious. And this change, O most learned prince, has doubtless been brought to pass by the powerful incantations of those wicked persons who now call themselves kings and queens of Narnia. I am rather of the opinion, said Rapidash, that it has come about by the alteration of the stars and the operation of natural causes. All this, said the Tisroc, is a question for the disputations of learned men. I will never believe that so great an alteration and the killing of the old enchantress were effected without the aid of strong magic. And such things are to be expected in that land, which is chiefly inhabited by demons in the shape of beasts that talk like men, and monsters that are half men and half beast. It is commonly reported that the High King of Narnia, whom may the gods utterly reject, is supported by a demon of hideous aspect and irresistible maleficence, who appears in the shape of a lion. Therefore, the attacking of Narnia is a dark and doubtful enterprise, and I am determined not to put my hand out farther than I can draw it back. How blessed is Calormen, said the vizier, popping up his face again, on whose ruler the gods have been pleased to bestow prudence and circumspection. Yet, as the irrefutable and sapient Tisroc has said, it is very grievous to be constrained to keep our hands off such a dainty dish as Narnia. Gifted was the poet who said, but at this point, Ahota noticed an impatient movement of the prince's toe and became suddenly silent. It is very grievous, said the Tisroc in his deep, quiet voice. Every morning the sun is darkened in my eyes, and every night my sleep is less refreshing, because I remember that Narnia is still free. Oh, my father, said Rapidash, how I show you a way by which you can stretch out your arm to take Narnia, and yet draw it back unharmed if the attempt prove unfortunate. If you can show me that, O Rapidash, said the Tisroc, you will be the best of sons. Hear then, O father, this very night and in this hour I will take but 200 horse and ride across the desert. And it shall seem to all men that you know nothing of my going. On the second morning I shall be at the gates of King Loon's castle of Anvard in Archenland. They are at peace with us, and I'm prepared, and I shall take Anvard before they have bestirred themselves. Then I will ride through the pass above Anvard and down through Narnia to Cair Paravel. The High King will not be there. When I left them, he was already preparing a raid against the giants on the northern border. I shall find Cair Paravel, most likely with open gates, and ride in. I shall exercise prudence and courtesy, and spill as little Narnian blood as I can. And what then remains but to sit there till Splendor Hylian, Splendor Hyaline puts in with Queen Susan on board. Catch my strayed bride as she sets foot ashore, swing her into the saddle, and then ride back to Anvard. But it is not profitable, O my son, said the Tisroc, that at the taking of the woman either King Edmund or you will lose his life. They will be a small company, said Rabadash, and I will order 10 of my men to disarm and bind them, restraining my vehement desire for his blood, so that there shall be no deadly cause for war between you and the High King. And how if the Splendor Hyaline is at Cair Paravel before you? I do not look for that with these winds, O my father. And lastly, O my resourceful son, said the Tisroc, you have made clear how all this might give you the barbarian woman, but not how it helps me to overthrowing of Narnia. O my father, can it have escaped you that though I and my horsemen will come and go through Narnia, as like an arrow from a bow, yet we shall have Anvard forever? And when you hold Anvard, you sit in the very gate of Narnia, and your garrison in Anvard can be increased by little and little until it is a great host. It is spoken with understanding and foresight, but how do I draw back my arm if all this miscarries? We shall say that I did it without your knowledge, and against your will, without your blessing, being constrained by the violence of my love and the impetuosity of youth. And how if the High King then demands that we send back the barbarian woman, his sister? O my father, be assured that he will not, for though the fancy of a woman has rejected this marriage, the High King Peter is a man of prudence and understanding, who will no way wish to lose the high honor and advantage of being allied to our house and seeing his nephew and grandnephew on the high throne of Calormen. I doubt that. He will not see that if I live forever, and is no doubt your wish, said the Tisroc in an even drier voice than usual. And also, O my father, and O the delight of my eyes, said the prince after a moment of awkward silence, we shall write letters as if from the queen to say that she loves me and has no desire to return to Narnia. For it is well known that women are as changeable as weather rocks, and even if they do not wholly believe the letters, they will not dare to come to Tashbaan in arms to fetch her. O enlightened vizier, said the Tisroc, bestow your wisdom upon us concerning this strange proposal. O eternal Tisroc, answered Ashta, the strength of paternal affection is not unknown to me, and I have often heard that sons are in the eyes of their fathers more precious than carbuncles. How then shall I dare freely to unfold to you my mind in a matter which may imperil the life of this exalted prince? Undoubtedly you will dare, replied the Tisroc, because you will find that the dangers of not doing are at least equally great. To hear is to obey, moaned the wretched man. Know then, O most reasonable Tisroc, in the first place, that the danger of the prince is not altogether so great as might appear, for the gods have withheld from the barbarians the light of discretion, as that their poetry is not, like ours, full of choice I actually don't know how to say this word. Apophagens? Apophagens? Apophagens. Oh, is this Hero 5th attempts to read word?
If you can't read the word, then I get to try.
Have fun with this one.
So it's APOPHTAEGMS. A pop.
No, there's no a pop.
Oh, that becomes an F.
The PH becomes a F.
Shush, I know whether it's an R.
And then it's a f to a th.
Okay. A puff the gems.
That's what I thought. It's just, but to say that as a proper word, apophagens, is I believe but it's, I don't know what that means. Anyways, anyone post anything in the chat about it? Did you spell it right?
S. Okay.
Oh, fair enough. When you break it up like that, it's pretty easy to spell. A short, pitiful, instructive saying? Huh. Pathogens. Pathogens. Anyways, sorry for the interruption. APPO. Apopha.
M's.
Apophathens? I've never heard this word before. You could just... There's...
Apathem.
Apathem?
Apathem.
I'm playing telephone with 3 different people.
I actually listen.
Yeah, but I'm listening to you try to recreate the sound now.
Apathem. Apathem.
Like me trying to say epitaph the first time. Epithet.
Apathem.
But I can't hear it.
It's fine, I'll show you later.
Now everyone knows how to say it, and I'm gonna be reading it wrong. Let's hope we never run across this word. And useful maxims, but is all of love and war. Sorry, the voice. With the vizier. But is all of love and war. Therefore, nothing will appear to them more noble and admirable than such a mad enterprise as this of ow! For the prince at the word mad had kicked him again. Desist, O my son, said the Tisroc, and you, estimable vizier, whether he desists or not, by no means allow the flow of your eloquence to be interrupted. For nothing is more suitable to persons of gravity and decorum than to endure minor inconveniences with I wanted to say consistency, but it's constancy. Sorry. To hear is to obey, said the vizier, wriggling himself round a little, so as to get his hinder parts farther away from Rabadash's toe. Nothing, I say, will seem as pardonable, if not estimable in their eyes, as this hazardous attempt, especially because it is undertaken for the love of a woman. Therefore, if the prince, by misfortune, fell into their hands, they would assuredly not kill him. Nay, it may be that though he failed to carry off the queen, yet the sight of his great valor and of the extremity of his passion, he might incline her heart to him. That is a good point, O babbler, said Rabadash. Very good. However, it came into your ugly head. I think the only thing Rabbit Ash has going for him right now is the fact that he doesn't like the Vizier. This is his only positive note. And the same thing, the only thing the Vizier's got going for him is the fact that he doesn't seem to like Rapidash. Neither of them are good people, but they acknowledge the other person's horrible. Anyways. The praise of my masters is the light of my eyes, said Ashta. And secondly, O Tisroc, whose reign must and shall be interminable. I think that with the aid of the gods, it is very likely that Anvard will fall into the prince's hands. And if so, we have Narnia by the throat. There was a long pause, and the room became so silent that the two girls hardly dared to breathe. At last the Tisroc spoke. Go, my son, he said, and do as you have said, but expect no help nor countenance from me. I will not avenge you if you are killed, and I will not deliver you if the barbarians cast you into prison. And if, either in success or failure, you shed a drop more than you need of Narnia noble blood, and open war arises from it, my favor shall never fall upon you again, and your next brother shall have your place in Calormen. Now go, be swift, secret, and fortunate. May the strength of Tash, the inexorable, the irresistible, be in your sword and lance. To hear is to obey, cried Rapidash, and after kneeling for a moment to kiss his father's hands, he rushed from the room. Greatly to the disappointment of Aravis, who was now horribly cramped, Tisroc and Vizier remained. O Vizier, said the Tisroc. O Vizier, said the Tisroc. It is certain that no living soul knows of this council we three have held here tonight. Oh, my master, said Ashta, it is not possible that any should know. For that very reason I proposed, and in your great wisdom agreed, that we should meet here in the old palace, where no council is ever held, and none of the household has any occasion to come. It is well, said the Tisroc. If any men knew, I would see to it that he died before an hour had passed. And do you also, O prudent Vizier, forget it. I sponge away from my own heart and from yours all knowledge of the prince's plans. He is gone without my knowledge or my consent. I know not whether, because of his violence and the rash and disobedient disposition of youth. No man will be more astonished than you and I to hear that Anvard is in his hands. To hear is to obey, said Ashta. That is why you will never think, even in your secret heart, that I am the hardest-hearted of fathers, who thus sends my firstborn son on an errand so likely to be his death, pleasing as it must be to you who do not love the prince, for I see in the bottom of your mind. Oh, impeccable Tisroc, said the Vizier, in comparison with you, I love neither the prince nor my own life, nor bread, nor water, nor the light of the sun. Your sentiments, said the Tisroc, are elevated and correct. I also love none of these things in comparison with the glory and strength of my throne. If the prince succeeds, we have Archenland, and perhaps hereafter Narnia. If he fails, I have 18 other sons, and Rapidash, after the manner of the eldest sons of kings, was beginning to be dangerous. More than 5 Tisrocs in Tashban have died before their time, because of their eldest sons. Enlightened princes grew tired of waiting for their throne. He had better cool his blood abroad than boil it in inaction here. And now, O excellent Vizier, the excess of my paternal anxiety inclines me to sleep. Command the musicians to my chamber. Before you lie down, call back the pardon we wrote for the third cook. I feel within me the manifest prognosities of indigestion. To hear is to obey, said the Grand Vizier. He crawled backwards on all fours to the front door, rose, bowed, and went out. Even then the Tisroc remained seated in silence on the divan till Aravis almost began to be afraid that he had dropped to sleep. But at last, with a great creaking and sighing, he heaved up his enormous body, signed to the slaves to precede him with the lights, and went out. The door closed behind him, the room was once more totally dark, and the two girls could breathe freely again. That was quite a tense chapter. Chapter 9, Across the Desert. I'm excited for it. dreadful! How perfectly dreadful! Whimpered Larceline. Oh, darling, I am so frightened. I'm shaking all over. Feel me. Come on, said Aravis, who was trembling herself. We've gone back to the new palace. Once we've got out of this room, we're safe enough. But it's wasted a terrible time. Get me down to that water gate as quick as you can. Darling, how can you? Squeaked Larceline. I can't do anything. Not now. My poor nerves. No, we must lie still a bit and then go back. My back, said Aravis. You don't understand. You're so unsympathetic, said Larceline, beginning to cry. Aravis decided it was no occasion for mercy. Look here, she said, catching Larceline and giving her a good shake. You say another word about going back, and if you don't start taking me to that water gate at once, do you know what I'll do? I'll rush out into that passage and scream. Then we'll both be caught. But we shall both be killed, said Larceline. Don't you hear what the Tisroc Mother forever said? Yes, and I'd sooner be killed than married to Ashta, so come on. Oh, you are unkind, said Larceline, and I in such a state. But in the end, she had to give in to Aravis. She led the way down the steps they had already descended, and another corridor, and so finally out into the open air. They were now in the palace gardens, which sloped down in terraces to the city wall. The moon shone brightly. One of the drawbacks about adventures is that when you come to the most beautiful places, you are often too anxious and hurried to appreciate them. So that Aravis, though she remembered them years later, had only a vague impression of great lawns, quietly bubbling fountains, and the long black shadows of cypress trees. When they reached the very bottom, and the wall rose frowning above them, Larceline was shaking so much that she could not unbolt the gate. Aravis did it. There at last was the river, full of reflected moonlight, and a little landing stage and a few pleasure boats. Goodbye, said Aravis, and thank you. I'm sorry if I've been a pig, but think what I'm flying from. Oh, Aravis, darling, said Larceline, won't you change your mind, now that you've seen what a very great man Ashta is? Great man, said Aravis, a hideous, groveling slave who flattens when he's kicked, but treasures it all up and hopes to get his own back by egging on that horrible Tisroc to plot his son's death? Pah! I'd sooner marry my father's scullion than a creature like that. Aravis, Aravis, how can you say such dreadful things? And about the Tisroc, may he live forever, too. It must be right if he's going to do it. Goodbye, said Aravis, and I thought your dresses were lovely, and I think your house is lovely, too. I'm sure you'll have a lovely life, though it wouldn't suit me. Close the door softly behind me. She tore herself away from her friend's affectionate embraces, stepped into a punt, cast off, and a moment later was out in the midstream with a huge, real moon overhead and a huge reflected moon deep down in the river. Oh my gosh. The air was fresh and cool, and as she drew near the farthest bank, she heard the hooting of an owl. Ugh, that's better, thought Aravis. She had always lived in the country and had hated every minute of her time in Tashbaan. When she stepped ashore, she found herself in darkness, for the rise of the ground and the trees cut off the moonlight. But she managed to find the same road that Shasta had found, and came just as he had done to the end of the grass and the beginnings of the sand, and looked, like him, to her left and saw the big black tombs. And now at last, brave girl though she was, her heart quailed. Supposing the others weren't there? Supposing the ghouls were there? But she struck out her chin, a little bit of her tongue too, and went straight towards them. But before she had reached them, she saw Bree and Hwin on the groom. You can go back to your mistress now, said Aravis, quite forgetting that he couldn't until the city gates opened next morning. Here is money for your pains. To hear is to obey, said the groom, and at once set off at a remarkable speed in the direction of the city. There's no need to tell him to make haste. He also had been thinking a good deal about ghouls. For the next few seconds, Aravis was busy kissing the noses and patting the necks of Hwin and Bree just as if they were quite ordinary horses. Ah, and here comes Shasta. Thanks be to the lion, said Bree. Aravis looked round, and there, right enough, was Shasta, who had come out of hiding the moment he saw the groom going away. And now, said Aravis, there's not a moment to lose. And in hasty words, she told them about Rabadash's expedition. One moment. Sorry, we had a roommate walk by. I will endeavor to continue while Hero's moving around. Told him about Rabadash's expedition. Treacherous hounds, said Bree, shaking his mane and stamping his hoof. An attack in time of peace without defiant scent. Oh, without defiant scent. So, like, no notice that a war is going to happen. Okay. But it will grease his oats for him. We'll be there before he is. One moment. Yes, sorry again about that. We'll be there before it's. Can we? Said Aravis, swinging herself into Hwyn's saddle. Just a wish she could mount like that. Boo-hoo, snorted Bree. Up you get, Shasta. Can we? And with a good start, too. He said he was going to start at once, said Aravis. That's how humans talk, said Bree. You don't get a company of 200 horse and horsemen watered and victualled and armed and saddled and started all in a minute. Now, what's our direction? Due north? No, said Shasta. I know about that. I've drawn a line. I'll explain later. Bear a bit to our left, both of you. Here it is. Now, said Bree, all that about galloping for a day and a night, like in stories, can't really be done. It must be walk and trot, but brisk trot and short walks. And whenever we walk, you two humans can slip off and walk too. Now, are you ready, Hwyn? Off we go. Narnia and the north. At first it was delightful. The night had now been going on for so many hours. The sun had almost finished giving back all the sun heat it received during the day, and the air was cool, fresh, and clear. Under the moonlight, the sand in every direction, and as far as they could see, gleamed as if it were smooth water or great on a great silver tray. Except for the noise of Bree's and Hwyn's hooves, there was not a sound to be heard. Shasta would nearly have fallen asleep. He had not had to dismount and walk every now and then. This seemed to last for hours. Then there came a time when there was no longer any moon. They seemed to ride in the dead darkness for hours and hours, and after that there came a moment when Shasta noticed that he could see Bree's neck and head in front of him a little more clearly than before, and slowly, very slowly, he began to notice the vast grey flatness on every side. It looked absolutely dead, something in a dead world, and Shasta felt quite terribly tired. He noticed that he was getting cold and that his lips were dry. And all the time, the squeak of the leather, the jingle of the bits, and the noise of the hooves, not puppety as it would be on a hard road, but thuppity on dry sand. At last, after hours of riding, far away to his right, there came a single long streak of paler grey, low down on the horizon, then a streak of red. It was the morning at last, but without a single bird to sing about it. He was glad of the walking bits now, for he was colder than ever. Then suddenly the sun rose and everything changed in a moment. Grey sand turned yellow and twinkled as if it were strewn with diamonds. On their left, the shadows of Shasta and Hwyn and Bree and Aravis, enormously long, raced behind them, right beside them. The double peak of Mount Pyre, far ahead, flashed in the sunlight, and Shasta saw they were a little out of course. Bit to the left, he sang out. Best of all, when you looked back, Tashbaan was already small and remote. The tombs were quite invisible, walled up in that single jagged, edged hump which was the city of Tisrock. Everyone felt better. But not for long. Though Tashbaan looked very far away when they first saw it, it refused to look any farther away as they went on. Shasta gave up looking back at it, for it only gave him the feeling that they were not moving at all. Then the light became a nuisance. The glare of the sand made his eyes ache, but he knew he mustn't shut them. He must screw them up and keep on looking ahead at Mount Pyre and shouting out directions. Then came the heat. He noticed it for the first time when he had to dismount and walk, and he slipped down to the sand. As he slipped down to the sand, the heat from it struck up into his face, and from the opening, give me a second. Then came the heat. He noticed it for the first time when he had to dismount and walk. As he slipped down to the sand, the heat from it struck up into his face as if from the opening of an oven door. Next time it was worse. For the third time, as his bare feet touched the sand, he screamed with pain and got one foot back in the stirrup and the other half over Bree's back before you could have said knife. Sorry, Bree, he gasped. I can't walk. It burns my feet. Of course, panted Bree. Should have thought of that myself. Stay on. Can't be helped. It's all right for you, said Shasta to Aravis, who was walking beside Hwin. You've got shoes on. Aravis said nothing and looked prim. Let's hope she didn't mean to, but she did. On again, trot and walk and trot, jingle, 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 squeak, squeak, squeak. Smell of hot horse, smell of hot self, blinding glare, headache. Nothing at all different from mile after mile. Tashbaan would never look any farther away. The mountains would never look any nearer. Felt this had been going on for always. Jingle, 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 squeak, squeak, squeak. Smell of hot horse, smell of hot self. Of course, one tried all sorts of games with oneself to try and make the time pass, and of course they were all no good. And one tried very hard not to think of drinks, iced sherbet, a palace in Tashbaan, clear spring water, tinkling with a dark earthy sound, cool, smooth milk, just creamy enough and not too creamy. And the harder you tried not to think, the more you thought. At last there was something different. A mass of rock sticking up out from the sand about 50 yards long and 30 feet high. It did not cast much shadow, for the sun was now very high, but it cast a little. Into that shade they crowded. There they ate some food and drank a little water. It's not easy giving a horse a drink out of a skin bottle. But Bree and Hwin were clever with their lips. No one had anything like enough. No one spoke. The horses were flecked with foam, and their breathing was noisy. The children were pale. After a very short rest, they went on again. Same noises, same smells, same glare. But at last their shadows began to fall on the right, and then got longer and longer, till they seemed to stretch out to the eastern end of the world. Very slowly, the sun drew nearer to the western horizon, and now at last it was down, and thank goodness, the merciless glare was gone, though the heat coming up from the sand was still as bad as ever. 4 pairs of eyes were looking out eagerly for any sign of the valley that Shalopad the raven had spoken about. Mile after mile, there was nothing but level sand. Now the day was quite definitely done, and most of the stars were out. Still the horses thundered on, and the children rose and sank in their saddles, miserable with their thirst and weariness. Not till the moon had risen did Shasta, in the strange barking voice of someone whose mouth is perfectly dry, shout out, "There it is!" There was no mistaking it now. Ahead, and a little to their right, there was at last a slope downward, and hummocks of rock on either side. The horses were far too tired to speak, but they swung round towards it. In a minute or two, they were entering the gully. At first it was worse in there than it had been out in the open desert, for there was a breathless stuffiness between the rocky walls and less moonlight. The slope continued steeply downwards, and the rocks on either hand rose to the height of cliffs. Then they began to meet vegetation, prickly cactus-like plants and coarse grass of the kind that would prick your fingers. Soon the horse hooves were falling on pebbles and stones instead of sand. Round every bend of the valley, and it was many bends, they looked eagerly for water. The horses were nearly at the end of their strength now, and Hwin, stumbling and panting, was lagging behind Bree. They were almost in despair before at last they came to a little muddiness and a tiny trickle of water through softer and better grass. And the trickle became a brook, and the brook became a stream, with bushes on either side. The stream became a river, and there came, after more disappointments than I could possibly describe, a moment when Shasta, who had been in a kind of doze, suddenly realized that Bree had stopped and found himself slipping off. Before them, a little cataract of water poured into a broad pool, and both the horses were already in the pool. And both horses were already in the pool with their heads down, drinking, drinking, drinking. Oh, said Shasta, and 1 second, I gotta pause. Sorry about that. Try continuing again. Oh, said Shasta, and plunged in. It was about up to his knees, and stooped his head right into the cataract. It was perhaps the loveliest moment in his life. It was about 10 minutes later when all four of them, the two children, wet nearly all over, came out and began to notice their surroundings. The moon was now high enough to down into the valley. There was soft grass on both sides of the river, and beyond the grass, trees and bushes sloped up to the bases of the cliffs. There must have been some wonderful flowering shrubs hidden in that shadowy undergrowth, for the whole glade was full of the coolest and most delicious smells. And out of the darkest recesses among the trees there came a sound Chest had never heard before. Nightingale. Everyone was much too tired to speak or to eat. The horses, without waiting to be unsaddled, lay down at once. So did Aravis and Shasta. About 10 minutes later, the careful Hwin said, "Oh, we mustn't go to sleep. We've got to keep ahead of the Rapidash." "No," said Bree very slowly. "Mustn't go to sleep. Just a little rest." Shasta knew, for a moment, that they would all go to sleep if he didn't get up and do something about it, and felt that he ought to. In fact, he decided that he would get up and persuade them to go on, but presently, not yet. Not just yet. Very soon the moon shone, and the nightingales sang over the two horses and the two human children, all fast asleep. It was Aravis who awoke first. The sun was already high in the heavens, and the cool morning hours were already wasted. "It's my fault," she said to herself furiously as she jumped up and began rousing the others. "One wouldn't expect horses to keep awake after a day's work like that, even if they can talk. And of course, the boy wouldn't. He's had no decent training, but I ought to have known better." The others were dazed and stupid with the heaviness of their sleep. "Oh, boo," said Bree. "Been sleeping in my saddle, eh? I'll never do that again. Most uncomfortable." "Oh, come on," said Aravis. "We've lost half the morning already. There isn't a moment to spare." "A fellow's got to have a mouthful of grass," said Bree. "I'm afraid we can't wait," said Aravis. "What's the terrible hurry?" said Bree. "We've crossed the desert, haven't we?" "But we're not in Archenland yet," said Aravis, "and we've got to get there before Rapidash." "Oh, we must be miles ahead of him," said Bree. "Haven't we been coming a shorter way? Didn't that raven friend of yours say this was a shortcut, Shasta?" "He didn't say anything about shorter," answered Shasta. "He only said better, because you got to a river this way. If the oasis is due north of Tashben, then I'm afraid this may be longer." "Well, I can't go on without a snack," said Bree. "Take my bridle off, Shasta. Please." Please," said Hwin very shyly. "I feel just like Bree, that I can't go on. But when horses have humans, with spurs and things on their backs, aren't they often made to go on when they're feeling like this? And then they find they can. I mean, oughtn't we be able to do even more, now that we're free? It's all for Narnia." "I think, ma'am," said Bree very crushingly, "that I know a little more about campaigns and forced marches and what a horse can stand than you do." To this, Hwin made no answer, being, like most highly bred mares, a very nervous and gentle person who is easily put down. In reality, she was quite right, and if Bree had had a Tarkan on his back at that moment to make him go on, he would have found that he was very good for several hours hard going. One of the worst results of being a slave and being forced to do things is that when there is no one to force you anymore, you find you have almost lost the power of forcing yourself. They had to wait while Bree had a snack and a drink, and of course Hwin and the children had a snack and a drink too. It must have been nearly 11 o'clock in the morning before they finally got going again. And even then, Bree took things much more gently than yesterday. It was really Hwin, though she was weaker and more tired of the two, who set the pace. The valley itself, with its brown, cool river and grass and moss and wildflowers and rhododendrons, was such a pleasant place that it made you want to ride slowly. Chapter 10. The Hermit of the Southern March. After they had ridden for several hours down the valley, it widened out, and they could see what was ahead of them. The river, which had been flowing here, joined a broader river, wide and turbulent, which flowed from their left to their right towards the east. Beyond this new river, a delightful country rose gently in low hills, ridge beyond ridge, to the northern mountains themselves. To the right, there were rocky pinnacles, one or two of them with snow clinging to the ledges. To the left, pine-clad slopes, Frowning cliffs, narrow gorges, and blue peaks stretched away as far as the eye could reach. Shasta could no longer make out Mount Pyre. Straight ahead, the mountain range sank to a wooden saddle, which of course had to be the pass from Archenland into Narnia. Ooh, the north, the green north, neighed Bree, and certainly the lower hills looked greener and fresher than anything that Aravis and Shasta, with their southern-bred eyes, had ever imagined. Spirits rose as they clattered down to the water's meet of the two rivers. The eastern flowing river, which was pouring from the higher mountains at the western end of the range, was far too swift and too broken with rapids for them to think of swimming it. But after some casting about up and down the bank, they found a place shallow enough to wade. The roared clatter of water, the great swirl against the horses' fetlocks, the cool stirring air, and the darting dragonflies filled Shasta with a strange excitement. Friends, we are in Archenland, said Bree proudly, as he splashed and churned his way out onto the northern bank. I think that river we just crossed is called the Winding Arrow. I hope we are in time, murmured Hwin. Then they began going up slowly and zigzagging a good deal, for the hills were steep. It was all open park-like country, with no roads or houses in sight. Scattered trees, never thick enough to be a forest, were everywhere. Shasta, who had lived all his life in almost treeless grassland, had never seen so many, or so many kinds. If you'd been there, you would probably have known, he didn't, that he was seeing oaks, beeches, silver birches, rowans, and sweet chestnuts. Rabbits scurried away in every direction as they advanced, and presently they saw a whole herd of fallow deer making off into the distance among the trees. Isn't it simply glorious? Said Aravis. The first ridge, Shasta turned in the saddle and looked back. There was no sign of Tashbaan. Desert, unbroken except by the narrow green crack down which they had traveled, spread to the horizon. Hello, he said suddenly. What's that? What's what? Bree said Bree, turning around. Hwin and Aravis did the same. That, said Shasta, pointing. Looks like smoke. Is it a fire? Sandstorm, I should say, said Bree. Not much wind to raise it, said Aravis. Oh, exclaimed Hwin. Look, there are things flashing in it. Look, they're helmets and armor. And it's moving this way. Tash, said Aravis. It's the army. It's Rapidash. Of course it is, said Hwin. Just what I was afraid of. Quick, we must get to Anvard before it. And without another word, she whisked round and began galloping north. Bree tossed his head and did the same. Come on, Bree, come on. Come on, Bree, come on, yelled Aravis over her shoulder. The race was very grueling for the horses. As they topped each ridge, they found another valley and another ridge beyond it. And though they knew they were going in a more or less the right direction, no one knew how far it was to Anvard. From the top of the second ridge, Shasta looked back again. Instead of a dust cloud well out into the desert, he now saw a black, moving mass, rather like ants, on the far bank of the Winding Arrow. They were doubtless looking for a ford. They're on the river, he yelled wildly. Quick, quick, shouted Aravis. We might as well not come at all if we don't reach Anvard in time. Gallop, Bree, gallop. Remember, you're a warhorse. It was all Shasta could do to prevent himself from shouting out similar instructions, but he thought, the poor chap's doing all he can already, and held his tongue. And certainly, both horses were doing, if not all they could, all they thought they could, which is not quite the same thing. Bree had caught up with Hwin, and they thundered side by side over the turf. It didn't look as if Hwin could possibly keep it up much longer. At that moment, everyone's feelings were completely altered by a sound from below. It was not the sound they had been expecting to hear, the noise of hooves and jingling armor mixed, perhaps, with Kellerman battle cries. Yet Shasta knew it at once. It was the same snarling roar he had heard that moonlit night when they first met Aravis and Hwin. Bree knew it too. His eyes gleamed red, and his ears lay flat on his skull. And Bree now discovered that he had not really been going as fast, not quite as fast, as he could. Shasta felt the change at once. Now they were really going all out. In a few seconds, they were well ahead of Hwin. It's not far, thought Shasta. I did think we'd be safe from line here. Oh, sorry, it's not fair. It's not fair, thought Shasta. I did think we'd be safe from lions here. He looked over his shoulder. Everything was only too clear. A huge, tawny creature, its body low to the ground, like a cat streaking across the lawn to a tree when a strange dog had gone into the garden, was behind them. And it was nearer every second and every half second. He looked forward again and saw something which he did not take in or even think about. Their way was barred by a smooth green wall about 10 feet high. In the middle of that wall there was a gate open. In the middle of the gateway stood a tall man dressed down to his bare feet in a robe colored like autumn leaves, leaning on a straight staff. His beard fell almost to his knees. Shasta saw all this in a glance and looked back again. The lion had almost got wind now. It was making snaps at her hind legs, and there was no hope now in her foam-flecked, wide-eyed face. "Stop!" bellowed Shasta in Bree's ear. "Must go back, must help." Bree always said afterwards that he had never heard or never understood this, and as he was in general a very truthful horse, we must accept his word. Shasta slipped his feet out of the stirrups, slid both his legs over to the left side, hesitated for one hideous hundredth of a second, and jumped. It hurt horribly and nearly winded him, but before he knew how it hurt him, he was staggering back to help Aravis. He had never done anything like this in his life before, and hardly knew why he was doing it now. One of the most terrible noises in the world, a horse's scream, broke from Hwin's lips. Aravis was stooping low over Hwin's neck and seemed to be trying to draw her sword. And now all three, Aravis, Hwin, and the lion, were almost on top of Shasta. Before they reached him, the lion rose on its hind legs, larger than you would have believed a lion could be, and jabbed at Aravis with his right paw. Shasta could see all the terrible claws extended. Aravis screamed and reeled in the saddle. The lion was tearing her shoulders. Shasta, half mad with horror, managed to lurch forwards towards the brute. He had no weapon, not even a stick or a stone. He shouted out idiotically at the lion as one would a dog. "Go home! Go home!" For a fraction of a second, he was staring right into its wide-open, raging mouth. Then, to his utter astonishment, the lion, still on its hind legs, checked itself suddenly, turned head over heels, picked itself up, and rushed away. Shasta did not for a moment suppose it had gone for good. He turned and raced for the gate in the green wall, which, now for the first time, he remembered seeing. Hwin, stumbling and nearly fainting, was just entering the gate. Aravis still kept her seat, but her back was covered with blood. "Come in, my daughter, come in," the robed and bearded man was saying, and then, "Come in, my son." As Shasta panted up to him, he heard the gate close behind him, and the bearded stranger was already helping Aravis off her horse. They were in a wide and perfectly circular enclosure, protected by a high wall of green turf. A pool of perfectly still water, so full that the water was almost exactly level with the ground, lay before him. At one end of the pool, completely overshadowed with its branches, there grew the hugest and most beautiful tree that Shasta had ever seen. Beyond the pool was a little low house of stone, roofed with deep and ancient thatch. There was a sound of bleating, and over to the far side of the enclosure there were some goats. The level ground was completely covered with the finest grass. Are you, panted Shasta, are you King Loon of Archenland? The old man shook his head. "No," he replied in a quiet voice. "I am the hermit of the southern march. Now, my son, waste no time on questions, but obey. This damsel is wounded. Her horses are spent. Rapidash is at this moment finding a ford over the winding arrow. If you run now, without a moment's rest, you'll still be in time to warn King Loon." Shasta's heart fainted at these words, for he felt he had no strength left, and he withered inside at what seemed the cruelty and unfairness of the demand. He had not yet learned that if you do a good deed, your reward usually is to be set to do another, and harder and better one. But all he said out loud was, "Where's the king?" The hermit turned and pointed with his staff. "Look," he said, "there is another gate, right opposite to the one you entered by. Open it and go straight ahead, always straight ahead, over level or steep, over smooth or rough, over dry or wet. Know by my art that you will find King Loon straight ahead, but run, run, always run." Shasta nodded his head, ran to the north gate, and disappeared beyond it. Then the hermit took Aravis, whom he had all this time been supporting with his left arm, half led, half carried her into the house. After a long time he came out again. "Now, cousin," he said to the horses, It is your turn. Without waiting for an answer, and indeed they were too exhausted to speak, he took the bridles and saddles off both of them. Then he rubbed them both down so well that a groom in the king's stable could not have done it better. There, cousins, he said, dismiss it all from your minds and be comforted. Here is water, and there is grass. You shall have a hot mash when I have milked my other cousins, the goats. Sir, said Fwyn, finding her voice at last, do the Tarkina live? Has the lion killed her? I, who know many present things by my art, replied the hermit with a smile, have yet little knowledge of things future. Therefore, I do not know whether any man or woman or beast in the whole world may be alive when the sun sets tonight. Be of good hope. The damsel is likely to live as long as any of her age. When Aravis came to herself, she found that she was lying on her face on a low bed of extraordinary... Oh. Apparently we have ads starting. So Hero has paused reading. Sorry for all the interruptions tonight for those who are the subbed people and can still hear me. I'm curious how far we've got to go. We have this boy. Seems to me we've got about a third of this particular. I kind of wonder why they hadn't gone to the Oasis in that way. I feel like if it was the shorter route, they would have gotten to Archenland faster. The only reason that the Oasis was not the way to go for quote-unquote an army invading is because the Oasis can't sustain a large group of men. Friend? The bird? What? It was the bird, the talking bird from, the council that they had in the Ash, I forgot the name. When, I can't, my brain is mush. Was when Shasta had gotten taken in and was being nursed back to health, quote unquote, by Tumnus, and Edmund and Susan were discussing stuff. The Crow had spoken about how the reason why the invasion had never succeeded is because when armies cross the desert, they can't sustain themselves in that oasis, and so there's a cap on the size of the invading army that can cross. That's why, even though Narnia technically is smaller, the larger country of the south couldn't really overwhelm them. And then he mentioned that if they knew about the river, that would make a difference, because you could get to the river and then the army could, well, drink off the river. But again, like, considering that these are just 4 people, well, yeah, 4 people, it seemed like, considering the oasis would probably be due north, it would have been faster. I think the only advantage, and maybe this is what made the difference, is that it's them passing through that ravine or whatever, crag in the ground, allowed them to be out of sight. Because as they were going over the hills and each of the rises, they could look out and they could see the army cross the desert, big and flat. The same could be said if, for example, they had left ahead of time. When the morning sun rose, the army in the distance could have potentially seen them in the far distance. That's the only thing I can think as to why perhaps it's a good thing they went the longer way. Are you trying to be engaged, but you're doing your own thing, eh? Community? Oh. respect. It's very jarring to get that suddenly and just I don't remember. Bu- 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 water, grass, children of that age. Okay. When Aravis came to herself, she found that she was lying on her face on a low bed of extraordinarily softness in a cool, bare room with walls of undressed stone. She couldn't understand why she had been laid on her face, but when she tried to turn and felt the hot, burning pains all over her back, she remembered and realized why. She couldn't understand what delightfully springy stuff the bed was made of, because it was made of heather, which is the best of bedding, and heather was a thing she had never seen or heard of. The door opened, and the hermit entered, carrying a large wooden bowl in his hand. After carefully setting this down, he came to the bedside and asked, "How do you find yourself, my daughter?" "My back is very sore, father," said Aravis. "There is nothing else wrong with me." He knelt beside her, laid his hand on her forehead, and felt her pulse. "There is no fever," he said. "You will do well. Indeed, there is no reason why you should not get up tomorrow. But now, drink this." He fetched the wooden bowl and held it up to her lips. Aravis couldn't help making a face when she tasted it, for goat's milk is rather a shock when you're not used to it. But she was very thirsty, and managed to drink it all, and felt better when she had finished. "Now, my daughter, you may sleep when you wish," said the hermit, "for your wounds are washed and dressed, and though they smart as they are, no more serious than if they had been the cuts of a whip. It must have been a very strange lion, for instead of catching you out of the saddle and getting his teeth into you, he has only drawn his claws across your back. 10 scratches, sore, but not deep or dangerous." "I say," said Aravis, "I have had luck. I wonder." Okay, we can all agree that was Aslan. That had to have been Aslan. I wonder why he actually harmed her and what the 10 represent, because it seems like it's always like recompense for some past deeds. Maybe it was like she stole the horse, she lied, she was mean to her friend or something. There's like 10 wrongs or something. Maybe. I feel like we could go back and maybe there's information we don't know. Yeah. Maybe the maidservant. What if it was because she left the maidservant, right? And the maidservant took her blame. Maybe the maidservant got 10 lashes with a whip. I could totally see that. Sorry. "Daughter," said the hermit, "I have now lived 109 winters and had never yet met any such thing as luck. There is something about all this that I do not understand. But if ever we need to know it, you may be sure we shall." "And what about Rapidash and his 200 horse?" asked Aravis. "Will not pass this way, I think," said the hermit. "They must have found a ford by now, well to the east of us. From there they will try to ride straight to An." "Or Shasta," said Aravis. "How has he far to go? Will he get there first?" "Good hope on it," said the old man. Aravis lay down again, on her side this time, and said, "Have I been asleep for a long time? It seems to be getting dark." The hermit was looking out the only window, which faced north. "It is not the darkness of night," he said presently. "The clouds are falling down from Stormness Head. Our foul weather always comes from there in these parts. There will be a thick fog tonight." Next day, except for her sore back, Aravis felt so well that after breakfast, which was porridge and cream, the hermit said she could get up. And of course she at once went out to speak to the horses. The weather had changed, and the whole of that green enclosure was filled like a great green cup with sunlight. It was a very peaceful place, lonely and quiet. Quinn at once trotted across to Aravis and gave her a horse kiss. "But where's Bree?" said Aravis, when each had asked after the other's health and sleep. "Over there," said Wynne, pointing with her nose to the far side of the circle. "And I wish you'd come and talk to him. There's something wrong. I can't get a word out of him." They strolled across and found Bree lying with his face towards the wall, and though he must have heard them coming, he never turned his head or spoke a word. "Good morning, Bree," said Aravis. "How are you this morning?" Bree muttered something that no one could hear. "The hermit says that Shasta probably got to King Loon in time," continued Aravis. "So it looks as if all our troubles are over. Narnia at last, Bree." "Sorry, Narnia at last, Bree." "I shall never see Narnia," said Bree in a low voice. "Aren't you well, Bree dear?" said Aravis. Bree turned round at last, his face mournful as only a horse can be. "I shall go back to Calormen," he said. "What?" said Aravis. "Back to slavery?" "Yes," said Bree. "Slavery is all I'm fit for. Can I ever show my face among the free horses of Narnia? I, who left a mare and a girl and a boy to be eaten by lions, while I galloped all I could to save my own wretched skin." "We all ran as hard as we could," said Hwyn. "Shasta didn't," snorted Bree. "At least he ran in the right direction. Ran back. And that is what shames me most of all. I, who call myself a war horse and boasted of 100 fights, be beaten by a little human boy, a child, a mere fool, who had never held a sword, nor any good nurture, for example, in his life." "I know," said Aravis. "I felt just the same. Shasta was marvelous. I'm just as bad as you, Bree. I've been snubbing him and looking down on him ever since you met us, and now he turns out to be the best of us all. But I think it would be better to stay and we say we're sorry than to go back to Calormen." "That's all very well for you," said Bree. "You haven't disgraced yourself, but I've lost everything." "My good horse," said the hermit, who had approached them unnoticed because his bare feet made so little noise on the sweet, dewy grass. "My good horse, you've lost nothing but your self-conceit. No, no, cousin. Don't put back your ears and shake your mane at me. If you are really so humbled as you sounded a minute ago, you must learn to listen to sense. You're not quite the great horse you had come to think, from living among poor dumb horses. Of course you are braver and cleverer than them. You could hardly help being that. It doesn't follow you that you'll be anyone very special in Narnia. But as long as you know you're nobody special, you'll have a very decent sort of horse. You'll be a very decent sort of horse, on the whole, in taking one thing with another. And now, you and my other four-footed cousin will come round to the kitchen door. We'll see about the other half of that match." Chapter 11. The Unwelcome Fellow Traveler. When Shasta went through the gate, he found a slope of grass and a little heather running up before him to some trees. He had nothing to think about now and no plans to make. He had only to run, and that was quite enough. His limbs were shaking, a terrible stitch was beginning in his side, and the sweat that kept dropping into his eyes, blinding them, and made... Oh my gosh. His limbs were shaking, a terrible stitch was beginning in his side, and the sweat that had kept dropping into his eyes blinded them and made them smart. He was unsteady on his feet too, and more than once he nearly turned his ankle on a loose stone. The trees were thicker now than they had yet been. In the more open spaces, there was bracken. The sun had gone in without making it any cooler. It had become one of those hot, gray days when there seemed to be twice as many flies as usual. Shasta's face was covered with them. He didn't even try to shake them off. He had too much else to do. Suddenly he heard a horn. Not a great throbbing horn like the horse's tash band, but a merry call. Horns like merry call. Zero to Toho. Next moment he came out into a wide glade and found himself in a crowd of people. At least it looked like a crowd to him. In reality there was about 15 or 20 of them, all gentlemen in green hunting dress and their horses, some in the saddle and some standing by their horses' heads. In the center someone was holding the stirrups for a man to mount, and the man he was holding it for was the jolliest, fattest, most apple-cheeked, twinkling-eyed king you could imagine. As soon as Shasta came in sight, this king forgot all about mounting his horse. He spread out his arms to Shasta, his face lit up, and he cried out in a great, deep voice that seemed to come from the bottom of his chest, "Corin, my son, and on foot, and in rags! What—" "No," panted Shasta, shaking his head. "Not Prince Corin. I know I'm like him. He saw His Highness and Tashman sent his greetings. The king was staring at Shasta with an extraordinary expression on his face. Are you King Loon? Gasped Shasta, and then, without waiting an answer, Lord King, fly! Anvard, shut the gates! Enemies upon you! Rapidash and 200 horses! Have you assured have you assurance of this boy? Oh, sorry. Have you assurance of this boy? Asked one of the other gentlemen. My own eyes, said Shasta. I've seen them. Raced them all the way from Tashban. On foot? Said the gentleman, raising his eyebrow a little. Horses. With the hermit, said Shasta. Question him no more, Darren, said King Loon. I see truth in his face. We must ride for it, gentlemen. A spare horse there for the boy. You can ride fast, friend. For answer, Shasta put his foot in the stirrup of the horse, which had been led down for him, and a moment later he was in the saddle. He had done it 100 times with Bree in the last few weeks, and his mounting was very different now from when it had been on the first night when Bree had said that he climbed up horse as if he were climbing a haystack. He was pleased to hear that Lord Darren say to the king, The boy has a true horseman's seat, sire. I'll warrant there's noble blood in him. His blood, aye, that's the point, said the king, and he stared hard at Shasta again, with a curious expression, almost a hungry expression, in his steady grey eyes. But by now the whole party was moving off at a brisk canter. Shasta's seat was excellent, but he was sadly puzzled as to what to do with the reins, for he had never touched the reins while he was on Bree's back. But he looked very carefully out of the corners of his eyes to see what the others were doing, as some of us had done at parties when we weren't quite sure what knife or fork we're meant to use, and tried to get his fingers right. We didn't dare try to really direct the horse. He trusted it would follow the rest. The horse was, of course, an ordinary horse, not a talking horse, but it had quite wit enough to realize that the strange boy on its back had no whip and no spurs, and was not really master of the situation. That was why Shasta soon him drink. That was why Shasta soon found himself at the tail end of the procession. Even so, he was going pretty fast. There were no flies now, and the air in his face was delicious. He'd got his breath back, too, and his errand had succeeded. For the first time since the arrival at Tashban, how long ago it seemed, he was beginning to enjoy himself. He looked up to see how much nearer the mountain tops had come. To his disappointment, he could not see them at all, only vague grayness rolling down towards them. He had never been in a mountain country before, and was surprised. The cloud, he said to himself. A cloud coming down. See, up here in the hills, one is really up in the sky. I shall see what the inside of a cloud is like. What fun! Often wondered. Far away on his left, and a little behind them, the sun was getting ready to set. They had come to a rough kind of road by now, and were making very good speed, but Shasta's horse was still the last of the lot. Once or twice, when the road made a bend, there was now a continuous forest on each side. They lost sight of the others for a second or two. Then they plunged into the fog, or else the fog rolled over them. The world became gray. Shasta had not realized how cold and wet the inside of a cloud would be, nor how dark. The gray turned to black with alarming speed. Someone at the head of the column winded the horn every now and then, and each time the sound came from a little farther off. He couldn't see any of the others now, but of course he'd be able to see as soon as he got round the next bend. But when he rounded it, he still couldn't see them. In fact, he could see nothing at all. The horse was walking now. Get on, horse, get on, said Shasta. Then came the horn, very faint. For he had always told him that he must keep his heels well turned out, and Shasta had got the idea that something very terrible would happen if he dug his heels into a horse's side. This seemed to him an occasion for trying it. Look here, horse, he said. If you don't buck up, do you know what I'll do? I'll dig my heels into you. I really will. The horse, however, took no notice of this threat, so Shasta settled himself firmly in the saddle, gripped with his knees, clenched his teeth, and punched both the horse's sides with his heels as hard as he could. The only result was that the horse broke into a kind of pretense of a trot for 5 or 6 paces, and then subsided into a walk again. And now it was quite dark, and they seemed to have given up blowing that horn. The only sound was a steady drip, drip from the branches of the trees. Well, I suppose even a walk will get us somewhere sometime, said Shasta to himself. I only hope I shan't run into Rapidash and his people. He went on for what seemed a long time, always at a walking pace. He began to hate that horse. He was also beginning to feel very hungry. Presently he came to a place where the road divided into two. He was just wondering which led to Anvard when he was startled by a noise from behind him. It was the noise of trotting horses. Rapidash, thought Shasta. He had no way of guessing which road Rapidash would take. But if I take one, said Shasta to himself, he may take the other. And if I stay at the crossroads, I'm sure to be caught. He dismounted and led the horse as quickly as he could on the right-hand road. The sound of the cavalry grew rapidly nearer, and in a minute or two, Shasta realized that they were at the crossroads. He held his breath, waiting to see which way they would take. There came a low word of command, "Halt!" Then a moment of horsey noises, nostrils blowing, hooves pawing, bits being champed, necks being patted. Then a voice spoke. "Attend, all of you," he said. "We are now within a furlong of the castle. Remember your orders. Once we are in Narnia, as we should be by sunrise, you are to kill as little as possible. On this venture, you are to regard every drop of Narnian blood as more precious than a gallon of your own. On this venture, I say, the gods will send us a happier hour, and then you must leave nothing alive between Caraparavel and the western waste." Ooh. But we are not yet in Narnia. Here in Archenland, it is another thing. In the assault on the castle of King Loons, nothing matters but speed. Show your mettle. It must be mine within the hour. And if it is, I give it all to you. I reserve no booty for myself. Kill me every barbarian male within its walls, down to the child that was born yesterday, and everything else is yours to divide as you please. The women, the gold, the jewels, the weapons, and the wine. The man that I see hanging back when he comes to the gates shall be burned alive. Whoa. So the last man to the gate gets killed. In the name of Tash, the irresistible, the inexorable, forward! With a great cloppity clop, the column began to move, and Shasta breathed again. They had taken the other road. Shasta thought they took a long time going past, for though he had been talking and thinking about 200 horse all day, he had not realized how many there really were. But at last the sound died away, and once more he was alone amid the drip from the trees. He now knew the way to Anvard, but of course he could not now go there. That would only mean running into the arms of Rabadash's troops. What on earth am I to do? Said Shasta to himself, but he remounted his horse and continued along the road he had chosen, in the faint hope of finding some cottage where he might ask for shelter and a meal. He had thought, of course, of going back to Aravis and Bree and Hwyn at the hermitage, but he couldn't, because by now he had not the least idea of the direction. After all, said Shasta, this road is bound to go somewhere. But that all depends on what you mean by somewhere. The road kept on getting to somewhere in the sense that it got to more and more trees, all dark and dripping, and to colder and colder air, and strange icy winds kept blowing the mist past him, though they never blew it away. If he had been used to mountain country, he would have realized that this meant he was now very high up, perhaps right at the top of the pass. Shasta knew nothing about mountains. "I do think," said Shasta, "that I must be the most unfortunate boy that ever lived in the whole world. Everything was right for everyone except me. Those Narnian lords and ladies got safely away from Tashban. I was left behind. Aravis and Bree and Hwyn are all snug as anything with that old hermit. Of course, I was the one who was sent on. King Loon and his people must have gotten safely into the castle and shut the gates long before Rabadash arrived, but I get left out." And being very tired and having nothing inside him, he felt so sorry for himself that the tears rolled down his cheeks. What put a stop to all this was a sudden fright. Shasta discovered that someone or somebody was walking beside him. It was pitch dark and he could see nothing, and then the thing, person, was going so quietly that he could hardly hear any footfall. But he could hear breathing. His invisible companion seemed to breathe on a very large scale, and Shasta got the impression that it was a very large creature. And he had come to notice this breathing so gradually that he had really no idea how long it had been there. It was a horrible shock. It darted into his mind that he had heard long ago that there were giants in these northern countries. He bit his lip in terror, but now that he really had something to cry about, he stopped crying. The thing, unless it was a person, went on beside him so very quietly that Shasta began to hope that he only imagined it.
But just as he was becoming quite sure of it, there suddenly came a deep, rich sigh out of the darkness beside him. It couldn't be his imagination. Anyway, he just felt the hot breath of that sigh on his chilly left hand. If the horse had been any good, or if he had known how to get any good out of the horse, he would have risked everything on a breakaway and a wild gallop. But he knew he couldn't make that horse gallop, so he went on a walking pace, and the unseen companion walked and breathed beside him. At last he could bear it no longer. "Who are you?" he said, scarcely above a whisper. "One who has waited long for you to speak," said the thing. Its voice was not loud, very large and deep. Are you a giant?" said Shasta. "You might call me a giant," said the large voice, "but I am not like the creatures you call giants." "I can't see you at all," said Shasta, after staring very hard. Then, for an even more terrible idea had come into his head, he said, almost in a scream, "You're not something dead, are you? Oh, please, please do go away. What harm have I done to you? Oh, I am the unluckiest person in the whole world." Once more he felt the warm breath of the thing on his hand and face. "There," he said, "that is not the breath of a ghost. Tell me your sorrows." Shasta was a little reassured by the breath. So he told how he had never known his real father or mother, and he had been brought up sternly by the fishermen. And then he told the story of his escape, and how they were chased by lions and forced to swim for their lives, and of all their dangers in Tashban, and about his night among the tombs, and how the beasts howled at him out of the desert. And he told about the heat and the thirst of their desert journey, and how they were almost at their goal when another lion chased them and wounded Aravis, and also how very long it was since he had had anything to eat. "I do not call you unfortunate," said the large voice. "Don't you think it was bad luck to meet so many lions?" said Shasta. "There was only one lion," said the voice. "What on earth do you mean? I've just told you there were at least two the first night, and—" "There was only one, but he was swift of foot." "How do you know that?" "I was the lion." The Shasta gaped with open mouth and said nothing. The voice continued. "I was the lion who forced you to join with Aravis. I was the cat who comforted you among the houses of the dead. I was the lion who drove the jackals from you while you slept. I was the lion who gave the horses the new strength of fear for the last mile so that you could reach King Loon in time. And I was the lion you do not remember, who pushed the boat in which you lay, a child near death, so that it came to shore where a man sat, wakeful at midnight, to receive you." "Then it was you who wounded Aravis?" "It was I." "But what for?" "Child," said the voice, "I am telling you your story, not hers. I will tell no one any story but his own." "Who are you?" asked Shasta. "Myself," said the voice, very deep and low, so the earth shook, and again, "Myself," loud and clear and gay, and then the third time, "Myself," whispered so softly you could hardly hear it, and yet it seemed to come from all around you, as if the leaves rustled with it. Shasta was no longer afraid of the voice. No longer afraid that the voice belonged to something that would eat him, nor that it was the voice of a ghost, but a new, different sort of trembling came over him. But he felt glad, too. The mist was turning from black to gray, and from gray to white. This must have begun to happen some time ago, but while he had been talking to the thing, he had not been noticing anything else. Now the whiteness around him became a shining whiteness. His eyes began to blink. Somewhere ahead he could hear birds singing. He knew the night was over at last. He could see the mane and ears and head of his horse quite easily now. A golden light fell on them from the left. He thought it was the sun. He turned and saw, pacing beside him, taller than the horse, Lion. The horse did not seem to be afraid of it, or else could not see it. It was from the lion that the light came. No one ever saw anything more terrible or beautiful. Luckily, Shasta had lived all his life too far south in Calormen to have heard the tales that were whispered in Tashban about a dreadful Narnian demon that appeared in the form of a lion. And of course, he knew none of the true stories about Aslan, the great lion, the son of the emperor beyond the sea, the high king and above all kings in Narnia. But after one glance at the lion's face, he slipped out of the saddle and fell at its feet. He couldn't say anything. Then he didn't want to say anything. And he knew he needn't say anything. The High King above all kings stooped towards him. Its mane, and some strange and solemn perfume that hung about its mane, was all around him. He touched his forehead with his tongue. He lifted his face, and their eyes met. Then instantly, the pale brightness of the mist and the fiery brightness of the lion rolled themselves together into a swirling glory and gathered themselves up and disappeared. He was alone with the horse on a grassy hillside under a blue sky, and there were birds singing. Chapter 12. Shasta in Narnia. Was it all a dream? Wondered Shasta. But it couldn't have been a dream. For there in the grass before him, he saw the deep, large print of the lion's front right paw. It took one's breath away to think the weight that could make a footprint like that. But there was something more remarkable than the size about it. As he looked at it, water had already filled the bottom of it. Soon it was full to the brim, and then overflowing, and the little stream was running downhill past him over the grass. Shasta stooped and drank a very long drink, and then dipped his face in and splashed his head. It was extremely cold and clear as glass, and refreshed him very much. After that he stood up, shaking the water out of his ears and flinging his wet hair back from his forehead, began to take stock of his surroundings. Apparently it was still very early in the morning. The sun had only just risen, and it had risen out of the forests which he saw low down and far away on his right. Country with which he was looking at was absolutely new to him. It was a green valley land, dotted with trees, through which he caught the gleam of a river that wound away. Oh my gosh. It was a green valley land, dotted with trees, through which he caught the gleam of a river that wound away roughly to the northwest. On the far side of the valley, there were high and even rocky hills, but they were lower than the mountains he had seen yesterday. Then he began to guess where he was. He turned and looked behind him and saw that the slope of which he was standing belonged to a range of far higher mountains. See, said Shasta to himself, those are the big mountains between Archenland and Narnia. I was on the other side of them yesterday. I must have come through the pass in the night. What luck that I hit it. At least it wasn't luck at all, really. It was him. And now I'm in Narnia. He turned and unsaddled his horse and took off its bridle. Though you are a perfectly horrid horse, he said. It took no notice of the remarks and immediately began eating grass. That horse had a very low opinion of Shasta. I wish I could eat grass, thought Shasta. It's no good going back to Anvard. We'll all be besieged. I better get lower into the valley and see if I can get anything to eat. So he went on downhill. The thick dew was cruelly cold on his bare feet. He came round into a wood. There was a kind of track running through it, and had he not followed this for many minutes, oh my gosh, I can do this. There was a kind of track running through it, and he had not followed this for many minutes when he heard a thick and rather wheezy voice saying to him, "Good morning, neighbor." Shasta looked round eagerly to find the speaker, and presently saw a small, prickly person with a dark face who had just come out from among the trees. At least, it was small for a person, very big indeed for a hedgehog, which is what it was. "Good morning," said Shasta, "but I'm not a neighbor. In fact, I'm a stranger in these parts." "Huh?" said the hedgehog inquiringly. "I've come over the mountain, from Archenland, you know." "Ah, Archenland," said the hedgehog. "That's a terrible long way. Never been there myself." "And I think, perhaps," said Shasta, "someone ought to be told that there is an army of savage Calormans attacking Anvard at this very moment." "You don't say so," answered the hedgehog. "Well, think of that. And they do say that Calorman is hundreds of thousands of miles away, right at the world's end, across a great sea of sand." "It's not nearly as far as you think," said Shasta. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm thinking about this. He was asleep. It was nighttime over the pass, and they'd woken up in that river gorge, and they'd left the city of Tashban in the night. So it was two, like one day to the gorge, then one day to the pass. Oh, like what, 2 days ride on horse? That's not that far for an army to travel. True. But it's at least like a day's travel for the prince, because he did get from, well, it's 2 days-ish travel, I guess, maybe a day and a half, because he did get from the city of Tashban all the way to Anvard in like a day and a half-ish. And we can confirm that the prince didn't have help from Aslan. I highly doubt that. There we go. It's not nearly as far as you think, said Shasta. And oughtn't something be done about this attack on Anvard? Oughtn't your High King be told? Certain, sure. Something ought to be done about it, said the hedgehog. But you see, I'm just on my way to bed for a good day's sleep. Hello, neighbor. The last words were addressed to an immense biscuit-colored rabbit whose head had just popped up from somewhere beside the path. The hedgehog immediately told the rabbit what it had just learned from Shasta. The rabbit agreed that it was very remarkable news, and that somebody ought to tell someone about it, with a view to doing something. So it went on. What? Every few minutes they were joined by other creatures, some from the branches overhead, and some from little underground houses at their feet. So the party consisted of 5 rabbits, a squirrel, 2 magpies, a goat-footed fawn, and a mouse. Note the hedgehog went to bed. And all talked at the same time, and all agreed with the hedgehog. For the truth was that in that golden age, when the witch in the winter had gone, and Peter the High King ruled at Cair Paravel, the smaller woodland people of Narnia were so safe and happy that they were getting a little careless. Presently, however, 2 more practical people arrived in the little wood. One was a red dwarf, whose name appeared to be Duffel. The other was a stag, a beautiful, lordly creature, with wide, liquid eyes, dappled flanks, and legs so thin and graceful that they looked as if you could break them with 2 fingers. Lions alive, roared the dwarf as soon as he heard the news. And if that's so, why are you all standing here chattering? Armies at Anvard! News must be sent to Cair Paravel at once. The army must be called out. Narnia must go to the aid of King Loon. Ah, said the hedgehog. Oh, he didn't go to sleep. But you won't find the High King at Cair. He's away to the north, trouncing those giants. And talking of giants, neighbors, that puts me in mind. Who'll take our message? Interrupted the dwarf. Anyone here got more speed than me? I've got speed, said the stag. What's my message? How many Calormen? 200, under Prince Rabadash, but the stag was already away, all 4 legs off the ground at once, and in a moment its white stern had disappeared among the remoter trees. Wonder where he's going, said a rabbit. You won't find the High King at Cair Paravel, you know. You'll find Queen Lucy, said Duffel, and then, hello, what's wrong with the human? He looks pretty green. Why, I do believe it's quite faint. Perhaps it's mortal hungry. When did you last have a meal, youngster? Yesterday morning, said Shasta weakly. Come on, then, come on, said the dwarf, at once throwing his thick little arms round Shasta's waist to support him. Why, neighbours, we all ought to be ashamed of ourselves. You come with me, lad. Breakfast better than talking. With a great deal of bustle, muttering reproaches to itself, the dwarf half led, half supported Shasta at great speed farther into the woods and a little downhill. It was a longer walk than Shasta wanted at that moment, and his legs had begun to feel very shaky before they came out from trees to a bare hillside. There they found a little house with a smoking chimney and an open door, and as they came to the doorway, Duffel called out, Hey, brothers, a visitor for breakfast. And immediately, mixed with a sizzling sound, there came to Shasta a simply delightful smell. It was one he had never smelt in his life before, but I hope you have. It was, in fact, the smell of bacon and eggs and mushrooms, all frying in a pan. Mind your head, lad, said Duffel a moment too late, for Sus had already bashed his forehead against the low lintel of the door. Now, continued the dwarf, sit you down. The table's a bit low for you, but then the stool's low too. That's right, and here's the porridge. Here's a jug of cream, and here's a spoon. By the time Shasta had finished his porridge, the dwarf's two brothers, whose names were Rogan and oh, it's like, God darn it, Brickle Thumb, were putting the dish of bacon and eggs and mushrooms and the coffee pot and the hot milk and the toast on the table. It was all new and wonderful to Shasta, for colorman food is quite different. He didn't even know what the slices of brown stuff were, for he had never seen toast before. He didn't know what the yellow soft thing they smeared on the toast was, because colorman you nearly always get oil instead of because in Calorman you nearly always get oil instead of butter. And the house itself was quite different from the dark, frowsty, fish-smelling hut of Ashin, and from the pillared and carpeted halls in the palaces of Tashban. The roof was very low, and everything was made of wood, and there was a cuckoo clock, and a red and white checkered tablecloth, and a bowl of wildflowers, and a little curtain on the thick panelled windows, and little curtains on the thick panelled windows. It was also rather troublesome having to use dwarf cups and plates and knives and forks. This meant the helpings were very small, but then there were a great many helpings, so that Shasta's plate or cup was being filled every moment. But every moment the dwarves themselves were saying, "Butter, please," or "Another cup of coffee," or "I'd like a few more mushrooms," or "What about frying another egg or so?" And when at last they had all eaten as much as they possibly could, the three dwarves drew lots for who would do the washing up, and Rogan was the unlucky one. Then Duffel and Bricklethumb took Shasta outside to a bench which ran against the cottage wall, and they all stretched out their legs and gave a great sigh of contentment, and the two dwarfs lit their pipes. The dew was off the grass now, and the sun was warm indeed. If there hadn't been a light breeze, it would have been too hot. "Now, stranger," said Duffel, "I'll show you the lie of the land. You can see nearly all of South Narnia from here. We're rather proud of the view. Right away on your left, beyond those near hills, you can just see the western mountains, and that round hill away on your right is called the Hill of the Stone Table. Just beyond." But at that moment he was interrupted by a snore from Shasta, who, what with his night's journey and his excellent breakfast, had fallen fast asleep. The kindly dwarves, as soon as they noticed this, began making signs to each other not to wake him, and indeed did so much whispering and nodding and getting up and tiptoeing away that they certainly would have waked him if he had been any less tired. He slept pretty well nearly all night, but woke up in time for supper. Sorry, nearly all day, but woke up in time for supper. The beds in that house were all too small for him, but they made him a fine bed of heather on the floor, and he had never stirred nor dreamed all night. One moment. Sorry, throat dry. Hero getting water. That's much better. I've been hydrated. Okay. And I did not lose my place. I put a bookmark in. Please tell me I put a bookmark in. There it is. Oh. They made him a fine bed of heather on the floor, and he never stirred nor dreamed all night. Next morning, they had just finished breakfast when they heard a shrill, exciting sound from outside. Trumpets, said all the dwarves, as they and Shasta all came running out. The trumpets sounded again, a new noise to Shasta, not huge and solemn like the horns of Tashban, nor gay and merry like King Loon's hunting horns, but clear and sharp and valiant. The noise was coming from the woods to the east, and soon there was a noise of horse hooves mixed with it. A moment later, the head of the column came into sight. First came the Lord Paradan on a bay horse and carrying the great banner of Narnia, a red lion on a green ground. Shasta knew him at once. Then came 3 people riding abreast, 2 on great chargers and 1 on a pony. The 2 on the chargers were King Edmund and a fair-haired lady with a very merry face, who wore a helmet and a mail shirt and carried a bow across her shoulder and a quiver full of arrows at her side. "Queen Lucy," whispered Duffel. "The Queen Lucy," whispered Duffel. But the one on the pony was Corin. After that came the main body of the army, men on ordinary horses, men on talking horses, who didn't mind being ridden on proper occasions, as when Narnia went to war, centaurs, stern, hard-bitten bears, great talking dogs, and last of all 6 giants, for there are good giants in Narnia. But though he knew they were on the right side of Shasta, at first could barely bear to look at them. Knew on the right side, Shasta at first could hardly bear to look at them. There are some things that take a lot of getting used to. Just as the king and queen reached the cottage and the dwarves began making low bows to them, King Edmund called out, "Now, friends, time for a halt and a morsel." And at once there was a great bustle of people dismounting, and haversacks being opened, and conversations beginning, when Corin came running up to Shasta and seized both hands and cried, "What, you here? So you got through all right? I am glad. Now we shall have some sport. Isn't it luck? We only got into harbor at Caraparavel yesterday morning, and the very first person who met us was Shirvey, the stag, with all this news of an attack on Anvard. Don't you think—" "Who is your highness's friend?" said King Edmund, who had just got off his horse. "Don't you see, sire? It's my double, the boy you mistook me for at Tashban." "Why, so he is your double," exclaimed Queen Lucy. "As like as 2 twins. This is a marvelous thing." "Please, your majesty," said Shasta to King Edmund, "I was no traitor. I wasn't, and I couldn't help hearing your plans, but I'd never have dreamed of telling them to your enemies." "I know now that you were no traitor, boy," said King Edmund, laying his hand on Shasta's head. "But if you would not be taken for one, another time try not to hear what's meant for others' ears. But all's well." After that, there was so much bustle and talk, and coming and going, that Shasta, for a few minutes, lost sight of Corin and Edmund and Lucy. But Corin was the sort of boy whom one is sure to hear pretty soon, and it wasn't long before Shasta heard Edmund saying in a loud voice, "By lion's mane, prince, this is too much. Will your highness never be better? You are more of a hard scald than a whole army together. I'd as lief have a regiment of hornets in my command as you." Shasta wormed his way through the crowd, and there he saw Edmund looking very angry indeed, Corin looking a little ashamed of himself, and a strange dwarf sitting on the ground making faces. A couple of fawns had apparently just been helping it out of its armor. "If I had but my cordial with me," Queen Lucy was saying, "I could soon mend this, but the High King has so strictly charged me not to carry it commonly to the wars as to keep it only for great extremities." What had happened was this. As soon as Corin had spoken to Shasta, Corin's elbow had been plucked by a dwarf in the army called Thornbutt. "What is it, Thornbutt?" Corin asked. Your Royal Highness, said Thornbit, drawing him aside, our march today will bring us through the pass and right to your royal father's castle. We may be in a battle before night. I know, said Corin. Isn't it splendid? Splendid or not, said Thornbit, I have the strictest orders from the King Edmund to see it that your Highness is not in the fight. You will be allowed to see it, and that's a treat enough for your Highness's little ears. Oh, what nonsense, Corin burst out. Of course I'm going to fight. Why, the Queen Lucy's going to be with the archers. The Queen's Grace will do as she pleases, said Thornbit, but you are in my charge. Either I must have your solemn and princely word that you'll keep your pony beside mine, not half a neck ahead, till I give your Highness leave to depart, or else, it is His Majesty's word, we must go with our wrists tied together like two prisoners. I'll knock you down if you try to bind me, said Corin. I'd like to see your Highness do it, said the dwarf. This was quite enough for a boy like Corin, and in a second he and the dwarf were at it, hammer and tongs. It would have been an even match, for though Corin had longer arms and more height, the dwarf was older and tougher. But it was never fought out. That's the worst of fights on rough hillside, for by very bad luck, Thornbit trod on a loose stone, came flat down on his nose, and found when he tried to get up that he had sprained his ankle. A really excruciating sprain, which would keep him from walking or riding for at least a fortnight. See what your Highness has done, said King Edmund, deprived us of a proved warrior on the very edge of battle. I'll take his place, sire, said Corin. said Edmund. No one doubts your courage, but a boy in battle is a danger only to his own side. At that moment, the king was called away to attend to something else. And Corin, after apologizing handsomely to the dwarf, rushed up to Shasta and whispered, Quick, there's a spare pony now, and the dwarf's armor. Put it on before anyone notices. What for? said Shasta. Why, so you and I can fight in the battle, of course. Don't you want to? Oh, yes, of course, said Shasta, but he hadn't been thinking of doing so at all, and began to get a most uncomfortable prickly feeling in his spine. That's right, said Corin, over your head. Now the sword belt. But we must ride near the tail of the column and keep as quiet as mice. Once the battle begins, everyone will be far too busy to notice us. Merry? Pippin? Anyone? Which is ironic, because this is Narnia, the Chronicles, and that would have been Lord of the Rings. Huh. Anyways. Chapter 13, The Fight at Anvard. By about 11 o'clock, the whole company was once more on the march, riding westward with the mountains on their left. Corin and Shasta rode right at the rear, with the giants immediately in front of them. Lucy and Edmund and Peridan were busy with their plans for the battle, and though Lucy once said, But where's his goose-cap highness? Edmund only replied, Not in the front, and that's good news enough. Leave well alone. Shasta told Corin most of his adventures, and explained that he had learned all his riding from a horse and didn't really know how to use the reins. Corin instructed him in this, besides telling him all about their secret sailing from Tashban. And where is the Queen Susan? At Cair Paravel, said Corin. She's not like Lucy, you know, who's as good as a man, or at least as good as a boy. Queen Susan is more like an ordinary grown-up lady. She doesn't ride to the wars, though she is an excellent archer. The hillside path which they were following became narrower all the time, and the drop on their right hand became steeper. At last they were going in a single file along the edge of a precipice, and Shasta shuddered to think that he had done the same last night without knowing it. But of course, he thought, I was quite safe. That's why the lion kept on my left. He was between me and the edge all the time. Then the path went left and south away from the cliff, and there were thick woods on both sides of it, and they went steeply up and up into the pass. There would have been a splendid view from the top if it were open ground, but among all those trees you could see nothing, only every now and then some huge pinnacle of rock above the treetops, or an eagle or two winding high up in the blue air. They smell battle, said Corin, pointing at the birds. They know we're preparing a feed for them. Shasta didn't like this at all. When they had crossed the neck of the pass and come a good deal lower, they reached a more open ground, and from here Shasta could see all Archenland, blue and hazy, spread out below him, and even, he thought, a hint of the desert beyond it. But the sun, which had perhaps 2 hours or so ago before it set. Perhaps 2 hours or so to go before it set was in his eyes, and he couldn't make things out distinctly. Here the army halted and spread out in a line, and there was a great deal of rearranging. A whole detachment of very dangerous-looking talking beasts, whom Shasta had not noticed before, and were mostly of the cat kind, leopards, panthers, and the like, went padding and growling to take up their positions on the left. The giants were ordered to the right, and before going there, they all took off something they had been carrying on their backs and sat down for a moment. Then Shasta saw that what they had been carrying were now putting on. Oh, then Shasta saw that what they had been carrying and were now putting on were a pair of boots, horrid, heavy, spiked boots, which came up to their knees. Then they sloped their huge clubs over their shoulders and marched to their battle position. The archers, with Queen Lucy, fell to the rear, and you could first see them bending their bows and then hear the twang-twang as they tested the strings. And wherever you looked, you could see people tightening girths, putting on helmets, drawing swords, and throwing cloaks to the ground. There was hardly any talking now. It was very solemn and very dreadful. I'm in for it now. I really am in for it, thought Shasta. Then there came noises from far ahead, the sound of many men shouting, and a steady thud, thud, thud. Battering ram, whispered Corn. They're battering the gate. Even Corn looked quite serious now. Why doesn't King Edmund get on? He said. Can't stand this waiting about. Chilly, too. Shasta nodded, hoping he didn't look as frightened as he felt. The trumpet, at last, on the move now trotting, the banner streaming out in the wind. They had trooped a low ridge now, and below them the whole scene suddenly opened out. A little, many-towered castle with its gate towards them. No moat, unfortunately, but of course the gate shut and the portcullis down. On the walls they could see, like little white dots, the faces of the defenders. Down below, about 50 of the colormans dismounted, were steadily swinging a great tree trunk against the gate. But at once the scene changed. The main bulk of Rabadash's men had been on foot, ready to assault the gate. But now he had seen the Narnians sweeping down from the ridge. There was no doubt those colormen are wonderfully trained. It seemed to Shasta only a second before a whole line of the enemy were on horseback again, wheeling round to meet them, swinging towards them. And now a gallop. The ground between the two armies grew less every moment. Faster, faster. All swords out now, all shields up to the nose, all prayers said, all teeth clenched. Shasta was dreadfully frightened, but it suddenly came into his head. If you funk this, you'll funk every battle all your life. Now or never. But when at last the two lines met, he had really very little idea of what happened. There was a frightful confusion and an appalling noise. The sword was knocked clean out of his hand pretty soon, and he'd got the reins tangled somehow. Then he found himself slipping. Then a spear came straight at him, and he ducked to avoid it. He rolled right off his horse, bashed his left knuckle terribly against someone else's armor, and then... It is no use trying to describe the battle from Shasta's point of view. He understood too little of the fight in general, and even of his own part in it. The best way I can tell you is what really happened is to take you some miles away to where the hermit of the Southern March sat gazing into the smooth pool beneath the spreading tree, with Bree and Hwyn and Aravis beside him. For it was in this pool that the hermit looked when he wanted to know what was going on. For it was in this pool that the hermit looked when he wanted to know what was going on in the world outside the green walls of his hermitage. There, as in a mirror, he could see at certain times what was going on in the streets of cities far further south than Tashban, or what whips were putting into Red Haven in the remote Seven Isles, or what robbers or wild beasts stirred in the great western forests between Lantern Waste and Telmar. And all this day he had hardly left his pool, even to eat or drink, for he knew that great events were afoot in Archenland. Aravis and the horses gazed into it too. They could see it was a magic pool. Instead of reflecting the tree and the sky, it revealed cloudy and colored shapes moving, always moving in its depths. They could see nothing clearly. The hermit could, and from time to time he told them what he saw. A little while before Shasta rode into his first battle, the hermit had begun speaking like this. I see 1, 2, 3 eagles wheeling in a gap by storm Stormness head. One is the oldest of all the eagles. He would not be out unless battle was at hand. See him wheel to and fro, peering down sometimes at Anvard, sometimes to the east, behind Stormness. Ah, I see now what Rabadash and his men have been busy all day. They have felled and lobbed a great tree. They are now coming. Lo. They're now coming. Great tree, and they are now coming out of the woods carrying it as a ram. That's a good break then. No, it's okay.
I was trying to feel like.
You flished it in a way that made the light reflect. Yeah.
No audio.
I think we'll keep going because we're really close to finishing. And once we finish this, that'll be good for tonight. I don't know what time it is, so. Well, sorry. No. I'm sorry. Yeah, we can definitely keep our eyes open and do a more thorough clean. Because to be honest, you misplaced your water bottle until like Dee found it today in the couch. So it's possible, but we've not spotted it. So, and I know we've obviously swept the kitchen and stuff, so it's not out there.
Yeah, it's definitely.
No, if it's anywhere, it'd be in the couch, and we will do a more thorough look after tonight. I'm hopefully, if it's not with us, hopefully you do find where it has gone misplaced.
No contact.
Oh, Hero was telling me, one of our viewers, when he came for a visit, he's one of our friends, might have misplaced a keychain. So hopefully, if we don't find it, that wherever it has gone misplaced, it is found. Okay, I'm taking a mental breather because, like, I was getting wrapped up in that. What? I can't do low voices that well. It makes I can't do loud and low that well. Unless I want to boom, but I don't want to boom that wake everybody the hell up. You get me one of those things that just automatically adjusts the pitch? Nah. Yeah, me speaking in a horrible dwarfish Irish Scottish accent. I don't know what it is. It's a... Well, yeah. I was making a reference to when I was trying to do the stupid dwarf voices. I'm really glad that they didn't have them talking to each other too much because I can only do the one accent. And not that good. I need to watch more people talking with different accents. I'm starting to really think that, yeah, the reason why the lashes or cuts on the back were because of the maid who got whipped. As Aslan did kind of, I'm telling your story, not hers. And the way that the hermit was all like, not much worse than a whip would give. It really seems like it's foreshadowing that. Plus, I did read these books ages ago, and it is tickling something in my memory, so I'm leaning heavily into that. Ow. Yawn hurt my jaw. Hope everyone's having a peaceful evening. But I'm stretching out. Okay. Now we must see the battle from somebody else's point of view. Okay.
now were coming out of the woods carrying it as a ram. They have learned something from the failure of last night's assault. He would have been wiser if he had set the men to making ladders, but it takes too long and he is impatient. Oh, this is the old man talking. Sorry, I'm like, this is weird phrasing for the in-between bits. Sorry. Can you imagine if a whole book is just written in a way that's as if some dude's telling you? Oh, there we go. They have learned something from the failure of last night's assault. That accent. It would have been wiser if he had set his men to making ladders. It takes too long and he is impatient. More than he is. He ought to have ridden back to Tashbat as soon as the first attack failed, for his whole plan depended on speed and surprise. Now they are bringing their ram into position. King Loon's men are shooting hard from the walls. 5 Calormans have fallen. Not many will. They have their shields above their heads. Rabadash is giving his orders now. There are rocks on them, sorry. With him are his most trusted lords, fierce Tarkans, in the eastern provinces. I can see their faces. There's Corridon of Castle Torment, and Azru, and oh my god, these names. I'm never gonna have to read them again, but god darn it. Shlamash and Ilgamoth of the Twisted Lip, and a tall Tarkan with a crimson beard. By the mane, my old master, Anradin, said Bree. Shh, said Aravis. Now the ram had started. I could hear as well as see what a noise that would make. Stroke after stroke. No gate can stand forever. But wait, something up by Stormness scared the birds. They're coming out of the masses, and wait again, I can't see yet. Ah, now I can. The whole ridge up on the east is black with horsemen. If only the wind would catch that standard and spread it out. Over the ridge now, whoever they are. Aha! I see the banner now. Narnia! It's the Red Lion. They're in full canter down the hill now. I can see King Edmund. There's a woman behind them among the archers. Oh. What is it? Asked Twin breathlessly. All his cats are dashing out in front of the line. Oh. All his cats are dashing out from the left of the line. Cats? Said Aravis. Great cats, leopards and such, said the hermit impatiently. I see. Cats are coming round in a circle to get at the horses of the dismounted men. A good stroke. The Calorman horses are mad with terror already. Now the cats are in among them. But Rabadash has reformed his line and has 100 men in the saddle. They're riding to meet the Narnians. There's only 100 yards between the two lines now, only 50. I can see King Edmund. I can see Lord Peridin. There are two mere children in the Narnia line. What can the king be on about to let them in the battle? Only 10 yards. The lines have met. The giants on the Narnians' right are doing wonders. One's down, shot through the eye, I suppose. The center's all in a muddle. I can see more on the left. There are the 2 boys again, lions alive. One is Prince Corin, the other like him, but 2 peas in a pod. It's your little Shasta. Corin is fighting like a mad. He's killed a Calorman. I can see a bit of the center now. Rabadash and Edmund are almost met them. But the press has separated them. What about Shasta? Said Aravis. Oh, the fool, groaned the hermit. Poor brave little fool. He knows nothing about this work. He's making no use of all of his shield. With all sides exposed. He hasn't the faintest idea what to do with his sword. Oh, he's remembered it now. He's waving it wildly about, nearly cut his own pony's head off. And he will in a moment if he's not careful. It's been knocked out of his hand now. Mere murder sending a child into that battle. He can't live 5 minutes. Duck, you fool. Oh, he's down. Killed? Asked the 3 voices breathlessly. How could I tell? Said the hermit. The cats have what? Sorry, I heard you laugh. It made me smile. The cats have done their work. All the riders' horses are dead or escaped now. No retreat for the Calormans on them.
Now the cats are turning back into the main battle. They're leaping on the ram's men. The ram is down. Oh, good, good. Gates are open from the inside. It's going to be a sortie. Sortie? First three are out. It's King Loon in the middle, the brothers Dar and Darren on each side of him. Behind them are Tren and Shar, and Cole with his brothers. Oh, with his brother Colin. There are 10, 20, nearly 30 of them out by now. The Kellerman line is being forced back upon them. King Edmund is dealing marvelous strokes. He's just slashed Corridon's head off. Some Kellermans have thrown down their arms and are running for the woods. Those that remain are hard-pressed. The giants are closing in on their right. Cats on the left, King Loon from the rear. The Kellermans are a little knocked now, fighting back to back. Their Tarkin's down, Bree. Loon and Azru are fighting hand to hand, and the king looks like winning. King is keeping it up well. King has won. Azru's down. King Edmund's down. No, he's up again. He's at it with Rabidash. They're fighting in the very gate of the castle. Several Kellermen have surrendered. Darren has killed Ilgamuth. Can't see what's happened to Rabidash. I think he's dead. Leaning against the castle wall, but I don't know. Clamesh and King Edmund are still fighting, but the battle is over everywhere else. Clamesh has surrendered. The battle is over. The Kellermans are utterly defeated. When Shasta fell off his horse, he gave himself up for loss. But horses, even in battle, tread on human beings very much less than you would suppose. After a very horrible 10 minutes or so, Shasta realized suddenly that there were no longer any horses stamping about in the immediate neighborhood, and that the noise, for there was still a good many noises going on, was no longer that of battle. He sat up and stared about him. Even he, little as he knew of battles, could soon see that the Archenlanders and Narnians had won. The only living Kellermans he could see were prisoners. The castle gates were wide open, and King Loon and King Edmund were shaking hands across the battering ram. From the circle of the lords and warriors around them, there arose a sound of breathless and excited, but obvious, cheerful conversation. And then suddenly, it all united and swelled into a great roar of laughter. Shasta picked himself up, feeling uncommonly stiff, and ran towards the sound to see what the joke was. A very curious sight met his eyes. The unfortunate Rabidash appeared to be suspended from the castle walls. His feet, which were about 2 feet from the ground, were kicking wildly. His chain shirt was somehow hitched up so that it was horribly tight under the arms and came halfway over his face. In fact, he looked just as a man looks if you catch him in the very act of getting into a stiff shirt that is a little too small for him. As far as could be made out afterwards, and you may be sure the story was well talked over for many a day, what happened was something like this. Early in the battle, one of the giants had made an unsuccessful stamp at Rabidash with his spiked boot. Unsuccessful because he didn't crush Rabidash, which was what the giant had intended, but not quite useless because one of the spikes tore the chainmail, just as you or I might tear an ordinary shirt. So Rabidash, by the time he encountered Edmund at the gate, had a hole in the back of his hauberk. And when Edmund pressed him back nearer and nearer the wall, he jumped up on the mounting block and stood there, raining down blows on Edmund from above. But then, finding about that this position, by raising him above the heads of everyone else, made him a mark for every arrow from the Narnian bows, he decided to jump down again. And he made to look and sound, no doubt for a moment, he did look and sound, very grand and very dreadful as he jumped, crying, "The bolt of Tash falls from the sky from above." But as he had to jump sideways, because the crowd in front of him left him no landing place in that direction, and then, in the nearest way you could wish, the tear in the back of his hauberk caught on a hook in the wall. Ages ago this hook had a ring in it for tying horses to, and there he found himself, like a piece of washing hung up to dry, with everyone laughing at him. "Let me down! Let me down, Edmund," howled Rabidash. "Let me down and fight me like a king and a man, or if you're too great a coward to do that, kill me at once." "Certainly," began King Edmund. King Loon interrupted. By your majesty's good leave," said King Loon to Edmund. "Not so." Then turning to Rabidash, he said, "Your Royal Highness, if you had given that challenge a week ago, I'd answer it, for there was no one in the King Edmund's dominion, from High King down to the smallest talking mouse, who would have refused it. by attacking our castle of Anvard in time of peace without defiance sent, you have proved yourself no knight, but a traitor, and one rather to be whipped by a hangman than to be suffered to cross swords with any person of honor. Take him down, bind him, and carry him within till our pleasure is further known." Strong hands wrenched Rabadash's sword from him, and he was carried away into the castle, shouting and threatening, cursing, and even crying. Though he could face torture, he couldn't bear being made ridiculous. In Tashben, everyone had always taken him seriously. At that moment, Corn ran up to Shasta, seized his hand, and started dragging him towards King Loon. "Here he is, father! Here he is!" cried Corin. "Aye, and here thou art at last," said the king in a very gruff voice, "and hast been in the battle, gleamed contrary to your obedience. A boy to break a father's heart. At your age, a rod to your breech were fitter than a sword in your fist. Ha!" But everyone, including Corin, could see that the king was very proud of him. "Chide him so more, sire, if it pleases you," said Lord Darren. "His highness would not be your son if he did not inherit your conditions. It would grieve your majesty more if he had to be reproved for the opposite fault." "Very well," grumbled the king. "We will pass it over this time. And now," he came to next surprise. What came next surprised Shasta as much as anything that had ever happened to him in his life. He found himself suddenly embraced in a bear-like hug by King Loon and kissed on both cheeks. Then the king set him down again and said, "Stand here together, boys, and let all the court see you. Hold up your heads. Now, gentlemen, look on them both. Has any man any doubts?" And still Shasta could not understand why everyone stared at him and at Corin, nor what all the cheering was about. Then, Chapter 14, How Bree Became a Wiser Horse. We must now return to Aravis and the horses. The hermit, watching his pool, was able to tell them that Shasta was not killed, or even seriously wounded, for he saw him get up and saw how affectionately he was greeted by King Loon. But as he could only see, not hear, he did not know what anyone was saying, and once the fighting had stopped and the talking had begun, it was not worthwhile looking in the pool any longer. Next morning, while the hermit was indoors, the three of them discussed what they should do next. "I have had enough of this," said Hwin. "The hermit has been very good to us, and I'm very much obliged to him, I'm sure. But I'm getting as fat as a pet pony, eating all day and getting no exercise. Let's go on to Narnia." "Oh, not today, ma'am," said Bree. "I wouldn't hurry things. Some other day, don't you think?" "We must see Shasta first and say goodbye to him and apologize," said Aravis. "Exactly," said Bree with great enthusiasm. "Just what I was going to say." "Oh, of course," said Hwin. "I expect he is in Anvard. Naturally, we'd look in on him and say goodbye. But that's on our way, and why shouldn't we start at once? After all, I thought it was Narnia we all wanted to get to." "I suppose so," said Aravis. She was beginning to wonder what exactly she would do when she got there, and was feeling a little lonely. "Oh, of course," said Bree hastily. "But there's no need to rush things, if you know what I mean." "No, I don't know what you mean," said Hwin. "Why don't you want to go?" "Well," muttered Bree. "Well, don't you see, madam? It's an important occasion, returning to one's country, entering society, the best society. It is so essential to make a good impression, not perhaps looking quite ourselves yet, eh?" Finn broke into a horse laugh. "It's your tail, Bree. I see it all now. You want to wait till your tail's grown again, and we don't even know if tails are worn long in Narnia. Really, Bree, you're as vain as that Tarkina and Tashpan." "You are silly, Bree," said Aravis. "By the lion's mane, Tarkina, I'm nothing of the sort," said Bree indignantly. "I have a proper respect for myself and for my fellow horses, that's all." "Bree," said Aravis, who was not very interested in the cut of his tail, "I've been wanting to ask you something for a long time. Why do you keep on swearing by the lion and by the lion's mane? I thought you hated lions." "So do I," said Bree. "But when I speak of the lion, of course I mean Aslan, the great deliverer of Narnia, who drove away the witch in the winter. All Narnians swear by him." "But is he a lion?" No, of course not," said Bree in a rather shocked voice. "All the stories about him in Tashbaan say he is," said Aravis. "And if he isn't a lion, why do you call him a lion?" "Well, you'd hardly understand that at your age," said Bree. "And I was only a little foal when I left, so I don't quite fully understand it myself." Bree was standing with his back to the green wall when he said this, and the other two were facing him. He was talking in a rather superior tone, with his eyes half shut. That was why he didn't see the changed expression on the faces of Hwin and Aravis. They had good reason to have open mouths and staring eyes, because while Bree spoke, they saw an enormous lion leap up from outside and balance itself on the top of the green wall. Only it was brighter yellow, and it was bigger and more beautiful and more alarming than any lion they had ever seen, and at once jumped down inside the wall and began approaching Bree from behind. It made no noise at all, and Hwin and Aravis couldn't make any noise themselves, no more than if they were frozen. "No doubt," continued Bree, "when they speak of him as a lion, they only mean he is as strong as a lion, or, to our enemies of course, as fierce as a lion, or something of that kind. Even a little girl like you, Aravis, must see that it would be quite absurd to suppose he is a real lion. Indeed, it would be disrespectful. If he was a lion, he'd have to be a beast just like the rest of us. Why," and here Bree begins to laugh, "if he was a lion, he'd have 4 paws and a tail, and whiskers, and oh, help!" For just as he had said the word whiskers, one of Aslan's had actually tickled his ear. Bree shot away like an arrow to the other side of the enclosure, and their turn. The wall was too high for him to jump, and he could fly no farther. Aravis and Hwin both started back. There was about a second of intense silence. Then Hwin, though shaking all over, gave a strange little neigh and trotted across the line. "Please," she said, "you're so beautiful. You might eat me if you like. I'd sooner be eaten by you than fed by anyone else." "Dearest daughter," said Aslan, planting a lion's kiss on her twitching velvet nose, "I knew you would not be long in coming to me. Joy shall be yours." Then he lifted his head and spoke in a louder voice. "Now, Bree," he said, "you poor, proud, frightened horse, draw near. Nearer still, my son. Do not dare. Touch me, smell me. Here are my paws. Here is my tail. These are my whiskers. I am a true beast." "Aslan," said Bree in a shaky voice, "I'm afraid I must be rather a fool." "Happy the horse who knows that while he is still young, or the human either. Draw near, Aravis, my daughter. See, my paws are velveted. You will not be torn this time." "This time, sir?" "It was I who wounded you," said Aslan. "I am the only lion you met in all your journeyings. Do you know why I tore you?" "No, sir." "The scratches on your back, tear for tear, throb for throb, blood for blood, were equal to the strips laid on the back of your stepmother's slave because of the drugged sleep you cast upon her. You needed to know what it felt like." "Hi. Yes, I was right." "Yes, sir. Please." "Ask on, my dear," said Aslan. "Will any more harm come to her by what I did?" "Child," said the lion, "I am telling you your story, not hers. No one is told any story but their own." Then he shook his head and spoke in a lighter voice. "Be merry, little ones. We shall meet again soon, but before that you will have another visitor." Then in one bound he reached the top of the wall and vanished from their sight. Strange to say, they felt no inclination to talk to one another about him after he had gone. They all moved slowly away to different parts of the quiet grass, and there paced to and fro, each alone, thinking. About half an hour later, the 2 horses were summoned to the back of the house to eat something nice that their hermit had got ready for them, and Aravis, still walking and thinking, was startled by the harsh sound of a trumpet outside the gate. "Who is there?" asked Aravis. "His Royal Highness, Prince Kor of Archenland," said a voice from outside. Aravis undid the door and opened it, drawing back a little way to let the strangers in. 2 soldiers with halberds came first, and took their stand at each side of the entry. Then followed a herald and a trumpeter. His Royal Highness Prince Cor of Archenland desires an audience of the Lady Aravis, said the herald. Then he and the trumpeter drew aside and bowed, and the soldiers saluted, and the prince himself came in. All his attendants withdrew and closed the gate behind them. The prince bowed, and a very clumsy bow for a prince it was. Aravis curtsied in the Calorman style, which is not at all like ours, and did it very well because, of course, she had been taught how. Then she looked up and saw what sort of person this prince was. She saw a mere boy. He was bareheaded, and his fair hair was encircled with a very thin band of gold, hardly thicker than a wire. His upper tunic was of white cambric, as fine as a handkerchief, so that the bright red tunic beneath it showed through. His left hand, which rested on the enameled sword hilt, was bandaged. Aravis looked twice at his face before she gasped and said, "Why, it's Shasta!" Shasta, all at once, turned very red and began speaking very quickly. "Look here, Aravis," he said, "I do hope you won't think I'm got up like this, and the trumpeter and all, to try and impress you, or make out that I'm different, or any rot of that sort, because I'd far rather have come in my old clothes, but they're burnt now, and my father said—" "Your father?" said Aravis. "Apparently King Loon's my father," said Aravis. "I might really have guessed it, for him being so like me. We were twins, you see. Oh, and my name isn't Shasta, it's Cor." "Cor is a nicer name than Shasta," said Aravis. "Brothers' names run like that in Archenland," said Shasta, or Prince Cor, as we must now call him. "Like Dar and Darren, Cole and Colin, and so on." Cor," said Aravis. "No, shut up. There's something I've got to say at once. I'm sorry I've been such a pig, but I did change before I knew you were a prince. Honestly, I did. When you went back and faced the lion. I wasn't really going to kill you at all." What? Okay, sorry, I read that wrong. "It wasn't really going to kill you at all, that lion." "I know," said Aravis, nodding. Both were still and solemn for a moment, as each saw that the other knew about Aslan. Suddenly Aravis remembered Cor's bandaged hand. "I say," she cried, "I forgot. You've been in a battle. Is that a wound?" "Mere scratch," said Cor, using for the first time a rather lordly tone. But a moment later he burst out laughing and said, "If you want to know the truth, it isn't a proper wound at all. I only took the skin off my knuckles just as any clumsy fool might do without going near a battle." Still, if you were in the battle," said Aravis, "it must have been wonderful." "It wasn't at all like what I thought," said Cor. "But Cor, you haven't told me anything yet about King Loon and how he found out who you were." "Well, let's sit down," said Cor, "for it's a rather long story. And by the way, Father's an absolute brick. I'd just be as pleased, or very nearly, at finding he was my father, even if he weren't a king. Even though education and all sorts of horrible things are going to happen to me. But you want the story. Well, Corin and I are twins. And about a week after we were both born, apparently, they took us to a wise old centaur in Narnia to be blessed or something. Now, this centaur was a prophet, as good as many centaurs are. Perhaps you haven't seen any centaurs yet? There were some in the battle yesterday, most remarkable people, but I can't say I feel quite at home with them yet. I say, Aravis, there are going to be a lot of things to get used to in these northern countries." "Yes, there are," said Aravis, "but get on with the story." "Well, as soon as he saw Corin and me, it seemed that centaur looked at me and said, 'A day will come when that boy will leave Archenland from the deadliest danger in whichever she lay. So of course my father and mother were very pleased, but there was someone present who wasn't. There was a chap called Lord of Bar, who had been father's Lord Chancellor, and apparently he'd done something wrong, bezzling or something word like that. I didn't understand that part very well, and father had to dismiss him, but nothing else was done to him, and he was allowed to go on living in Archenland. But he must have been as bad as he could be, for it came out afterwards he had been in pay of the Tisrock, and had sent a lot of secret information to Tashban. So as soon as he heard I was going to save Archenland from a great danger, he decided I must be put out of the way. Well, he succeeded in kidnapping me, I don't exactly know how, and rowed away down the winding arrow to the coast. He'd had everything prepared, and there was a ship manned with his own followers lying ready for him, and he put out to sea with me on board. But father got wind of it, though not quite in time, and was after him as quickly as he could. The Lord Barr was already at sea when father reached the coast, but not out of sight, and father embarked in one of his own warships within 20 minutes. It must have been a wonderful chase. There were 6 days following Barr's galleon, and brought her to battle on the 7th. It was a great sea fight. I heard a lot about it yesterday evening. From 10 o'clock in the morning till sunset, our people took the ship in the end. Hold on, I got a cough. Sorry about that. Our people took the ship in the end, but I wasn't there. Lord Barr himself had been killed in the battle. One of his men had said that early in the morning, as soon as he saw he was certain to be overhauled, Barr had given me to one of his knights and sent us both away in the ship's boat. That boat was never seen again. Of course, that was the same boat that Aslan, he seems to be at the back of all the stories, pushed ashore at the right place for Arshin to pick me up. I wish I knew that knight's name, for he must have kept me alive and starved himself to do it. I suppose Aslan would say that was part of someone else's story, said Aravis. I was forgetting that, said Cor. And I wonder how the prophecy will work out, said Aravis, and what the great danger is that you're to save Archelin from. Well, said Cor rather awkwardly, they seem to think I've done it already. Aravis clapped her hands. Why, of course! How stupid I am! And how wonderful! Archelin can never be in much great danger than it was when Rabadash crossed the Arrow with his 200 horse, and you hadn't yet got through with your message. Don't you feel proud? I think I feel a bit scared, said Cor. And you'll be living at Anvard now, said Aravis rather wistfully. Oh, said Cor, I'd nearly forgotten that when it came about. Father wants you to come and live with us. He says there's been no lady in the court, they call it a court, I don't know why, since Mother died. Aravis, you'll like Father and Corin. They're not like me. They've been properly brought up. You needn't be afraid of that. Oh, stop it, said Aravis, or we'll have a real fight. Of course I'll come. Oh, now let's go and see the horses. That seemed rather abrupt and no offense. There was a great and joyous meeting between Bree and Cor. And Bree, who was still in a rather subdued frame of mind, agreed to set out for Anvard at once. He and Hwin would cross into Narnia on the following day. All four bade an affectionate farewell to the hermit and promised that they would visit him again soon. But by about a middle of the morning, they were on their way. The horses had expected that Aravis and Cor would ride, but Cor explained that except in war, where everyone must do what he can do best, no one in Narnia or Archelin ever dreamed of mounting a talking horse. This reminded poor Bree again how little he knew about Narnian customs and what dreadful mistakes he might make. So while Hwin strolled along in a happy dream, Bree got more nervous and more self-conscious with every step he took. Look up, Bree, said Cor. It's far worse for me than for you. You aren't going to be educated. I shall be learning reading and writing and heraldry and dancing and history and music, while you'll be galloping and rolling on the hills of Narnia to your heart's content. But that's just the point, groaned Bree. Do talking horses roll? Supposing they don't. I can't bear to give it up. What do you think, Hwin? I'm going to roll anyway, said Hwin. I don't suppose any of them will care 2 lumps of sugar whether you roll or not. Are we near the castle? Said Bree to Cor. Round the next bend, said the prince. Well, said Bree, I'm going to have a good one now. It may be the last. Wait for me a minute. It was 5 minutes before he rose again, blowing hard and covered with bits of bracken. Now I'm ready, he said in a voice of profound gloom. Oh, now I'm ready. Lead on, Prince Cor, Narnia in the north. But he looked more like a horse going to a funeral than a long-lost captive returning to home and freedom. Chapter 15, Rabadash the Ridiculous. The next turn of the road brought them out from among the trees, and there, across green lawns, sheltered from the north wind by the high wooded ridge at its back, they saw the castle of Anvard. It was very old and built of a warm, reddish-brown stone. Before they had reached the gate, King Lune came out to meet them. not looking at all like Aravis's idea of a king, and wearing the oldest of old clothes. He had just come from making a round of the kennels with his huntsman, and had only stopped for a moment to wash his doggy hands. But the bow with which he greeted Aravis as he took her hand would have been stately enough for an emperor. "Little lady," he said, "we bid you good, heartily welcome. If my dear wife were still alive, we could make you a better cheer, but could not do it with a better will. And I am sorry that you have had misfortunes and been driven from your father's house, which cannot but be grief to you. My son Cor told me about your adventures together, and all your valor." "It was he who did all that, sir," said Aravis. "Why, he rushed at a lion to save me." "Eh, what's that?" said King Loon, his face brightening. "I haven't heard that part of the story." Then Aravis told it, and Cor, who had very much wanted the story to be known, though he felt he couldn't tell it himself, didn't enjoy it so much as he had expected, and indeed felt rather foolish. But his father enjoyed it very much indeed, and in the course of the next few weeks told it to so many people that Cor wished it had never happened. Then the king turned to Hwin and Bree, and was just as polite to them as to Aravis, and asked them a lot of questions about their families and where they had lived in Narnia before they had been captured. The horses were rather tongue-tied, for they weren't yet used to being talked to as equals by humans. Grown-up humans, that is. They didn't mind Aravis and Cor. Presently, Queen Lucy came out from the castle and joined them, and King Loon said to Aravis, "Sorry, 1 second. My leg's cramping." Almost at the end. Presently, Queen Lucy came up from the castle and joined them, and King Loon said to Aravis, "My dear, here is a loving friend of our house, and she has been seeing that your apartments are put to rights for you better than I could have done it." "You'd like to come and see them, wouldn't you?" said Lucy, kissing Aravis. They liked each other at once, and soon went away together to talk about Aravis's bedroom and Aravis's boudoir, and about getting clothes for her, and all the sort of things girls do talk about on such an occasion. After lunch, which they had on the terrace, it was cold birds and game pie and wine and bread and cheese. King Loon ruffled up his brow and heaved a sigh and said, "Hi ho! We have still that sorry creature Rabadash on our hands, my friends. We must need resolve what to do with him." Lucy was sitting on the king's right and Aravis on his left. King Edmund sat on one end of the table, and Lord Darren faced him on the other. Dar and Peridin and Corin were on the same side as the king. "Your Majesty, your Majesty would have a perfect right to strike off his head," said Peridin. "Such an assault as he made puts him on level with assassins." "It is very true," said Edmund, "but even a traitor may mend. I have known one that did, and he looked very thoughtful." "To kill this Rabadash would go near to raising war with the Tisroc," said Darren. "A fig for that Tisroc," said King Loon. "His strength is in numbers, and numbers will never cross the desert. But I have no stomach for killing men, even traitors, in cold blood. To have cut his throat in the battle would have eased my heart mightily, but this is a different thing." "By my counsel," said Lucy, "your Majesty shall give him another trial. Let him go free on a straight promise of fair dealing in the future. It may be that he will keep his word." "Maybe apes will grow honest, sister," said Edmund. "But, by the lion, if he breaks it again, may it be in such a time and place that any of us could swap off his head in clean battle. It shall be tried," said the king, and then to one of the attendants, "Send for the prisoner, friend." Rabadash was brought before them in chains. To look at him, anyone would have supposed that he had passed the night in a noisome dungeon without food or water, but in reality he had been shut up in quite a comfortable room and provided with an excellent supper. But he was sulking far too furiously to touch the supper, and had spent the whole night stamping and roaring and cursing. He naturally did not now look his best. Your Royal Highness need not be... Ugh. Your Royal Highness needs not to be told, said King Loon, that by the law of nations, as well as by any reasons of prudent policy, we have as good a right to your head as ever one mortal man had against another. Nevertheless, in consideration of your youth, and the ill-nurtured, devoid of all gentleness and courtesy, which you have doubtless had in the land of slaves and tyrants, we are disposed to set you free, unharmed, on this condition. First, that... Curse you, you for a barbarian dog, sputtered Rapidash. Do you think I will ever hear your conditions? Bah, you talk very largely of nurture, and I know not what. It's easy to a man in chains. Ha! Take off these vile bonds, give me a sword, and let any of you who dares then debate with me. Nearly all the lords sprang to their feet, and Corrin shouted, Father, can I box him, please? Peace, your majesties, my lords, said King Loon. Have we no more gravity among us than to be so chafed by the taunt of a pajuk? Sit down, Corn, or I shall leave the table. Oh, sorry. Sit down. Sit down, Corn, or shalt leave the table. I ask your highness again to hear our conditions. I hear no conditions from barbarians and sorcerers, said Rapidash. Not one of you dare touch a hair of my head. Every insult you have heaped on me shall be paid with oceans of Narnian and Archenlandish blood. Terrible shall be the vengeance of the Tisrockby, even now, but kill me, and the burnings and torturings in these northern lands shall become a tale to frighten the world 1,000 years hence. Beware, beware, beware. The bolt of Tash falls from above. Does it ever get caught on halfway? Said Torn. Shame, Corn, said the king. Never taunt a man save when he is stronger than you. Then, as you please. Don't taunt a weaker man, only taunt stronger men. Got it. Oh, you foolish Rapidash, sighed Lucy. Next moment, Cor wondered why everyone at the table had risen and was standing perfectly still. Of course, he did the same himself, and then he saw the reason. Aslan was among them, though no one had seen him coming. Rapidash started at the immense shape of the lion, as the immense shape of the lion paced softly in between him and his accusers. Rapidash, said Aslan, take heed. Your doom is very near. You may still avoid it. Forget your pride. What have you to be proud of? And your anger. It's done you wrong. And accept the mercy of these good kings. Then Rapidash rolled his eyes and spread out his mouth in a horrible, long, merciless grin, like a shark, and waggled his ears up and down. Anyone can learn how to do this if they take the trouble. He had always found this very effective in Calormen. The bravest had trembled when he made these faces, and ordinary people had fallen to the floor, and sensitive people had often fainted. What the frick? Rolled eyes, spread out his mouth in a horrible, long, mirthless grin like a shark, and waggled his ears up and down. I'm trying to imagine that face, and I can't picture anything but laughing at it. People fainted. Come on. Sensitive people had often fainted. What Rapidash hadn't realized is that it is very easy to frighten people who know you can have them boiled alive the moment you give the word. The grimace didn't look at all alarming in Archenland. Indeed, Lucy only thought Rapidash was going to be sick. Demon, 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 shrieked the prince. I know you. You are the foul fiend of Narnia. You are the enemy of the gods. Learn who I am, horrible phantasm. I am descended from Tash, the inexorable, the irresistible. The curse of Tash is upon you. Lightning in the shape of scorpions shall be rained on you. The mountains of Narnia shall be ground into dust. Have a care, Rapidash, said Aslan quietly. The doom is nearer now. It is at the door. It has lifted the latch. Let the skies fall, shrieked Rapidash. Let the earth gape. Let blood and fire obliterate the world. But be sure I will never desist till I have dragged to my palace by her hair the barbarian queen, the daughter of dogs, The hour has struck, said Aslan, and Rapidash saw to his supreme horror everyone had begun to laugh. They couldn't help it. Rapidash had been wagging his ears all the time, and as soon as Aslan said the hour has struck, his ears began to change. They grew longer and more pointed, and soon were covered with gray hair. And while everyone was wondering where they had seen ears like that before, Rabidash's face began to change too. It grew longer and thicker at the top, and larger eyed, and the nose sank back into the face, or else the face swelled out and became all nose, and there was hair all over it. And his arms grew longer and came down in front of him till his hands were resting on the ground, only they weren't hands now, they were hooves. He was standing on all fours, and his clothes disappeared, and everyone laughed louder and louder because they couldn't help it, for now what had been Rapidash was simply and unmistakably a donkey. The terrible thing was that his human speech lasted just a moment longer than his human shape, so when he realized the change that was coming over him, he screamed out, "Oh, not a donkey! Mercy! If it were even a horse! Eon, eon, eon!" And soon the words died away into a donkey's bray. "Now hear me, Rapidash," said Aslan. "Justice shall be mixed with mercy. You shall not always be an ass." At this, of course, the donkey twitched its ears forwards, and that also was so funny that everybody laughed all the more. They tried not to, but they tried in vain. "You have appealed to Tash," said Aslan, "and in the temple of Tash you shall be healed. You must stand before the altar of Tash and Tashbaan, and the great autumn feast this year, and there, in the sight of all Tashbaan, your ass's shape will fall from you, and all men will know you for Prince Rapidash. But as long as you live, if ever you go more than 10 miles away from the great temple in Tashbaan, you shall instantly become again as you are now. From that second change, there will be no return." There was a short silence, and then they all stirred and looked at one another as if they were waking from sleep. Aslan was gone, but there was a brightness in the air and on the grass, and a joy in their hearts, which assured them that he had been no dream, and anyway, there was the donkey in front of them. King Loon was the kindest-hearted of men, and on seeing his enemy in this regrettable condition, forgot all his anger. "Your Royal Highness," he said, "I am most truly sorry for things that things have come to this extremity. Your Highness will bear witness that it was none of our doing, and of course we shall be delighted to provide your Highness with shipping back to Tashbaan for the treatment which Aslan has prescribed. We shall have every comfort which your Highness's situation allows. As to the cattle boats, the freshest carrots and thistles." But a deafening bray from the donkey and a well-aimed kick at one of the guards made it clear that these kindly offers were ungratefully received. And here, to get him out of the way, I better finish off the story of Rapidash. He, or it, was duly sent back by boat to Tashbaan and brought into the temple of Tash at the great autumn festival, and then he became a man again. But of course, 4,000 or 5,000 people had seen the transformation, and the affair could not possibly be hushed up. And after the old Tisrock's death, when Rapidash became Tisrock in his place, he turned out the most peaceable Tisrock Calorman had ever known. This was because, not daring to go more than 10 miles from Tashbaan, he could never go on a war himself, and he didn't want his Tarkans to win fame in the wars at his expense. For that is the way Tisrock get overthrown. But though his reasons were selfish, it made things much more comfortable for all the smaller countries round Calorman. His own people never forgot he had been a donkey. During his reign, and to his face, he was called Rapidash the Peacemaker, but after his death, and behind his back, he was called Rapidash the Ridiculous. And if you look him up in a good history of Calorman, or at the local library, you'll find him under that name. And to this day, in Calorman schools, if you do anything unusually stupid, you're very likely to be called a second Rapidash. Meanwhile, at Anvard, everyone was very glad that he had been disposed of before the real fun began, which was a great grand feast held that evening on the lawn before the castle, with dozens of lanterns to help the moonlight, and wine flowed, and tales were told, and jokes were cracked, and then silence was made, and the king's poet, with 2 fiddlers, stepped out into the middle of the circle. Aravis and Cor prepared themselves to be bored. The only poetry they knew was the Calorman kind, and you know now what that was like. With the very first scrape of the fiddles, a rocket seemed to go up inside their heads, And the poet sang of the great old lady of fair Ulven, and how she fought the giant Peer and turned him into stone, and that is the origin of Mount Peer. It was two-headed giant, and won the lady Liln for his bride. When it was over, they wished it was going to begin again, and though Bree couldn't sing, he told the story of the fight at Zulindre, and Lucy told again. They had all, except Aravis and Cor, heard it many times, but they all wanted it again, the tale of the wardrobe and how she and King Edmund and Queen Susan and Peter, the High King, had first come into Narnia. And presently, as was certain to happen sooner or later, King Lune said it was time for young people to be in bed. And tomorrow, Cor, he added, shalt come over all the castle with me and see the estate, and mark all its strength and weakness, for it will be thine to guard when I am gone. But Corn will be king then, father, said Cor. Nay, lad, said King Lune, thou art my heir. The crown comes to thee. But I don't want it, said Cor. I'd far rather. 'Tis no question what thou wantest, Cor, nor I either. 'Tis in the course of law. But if we're twins, we must be of the same age. Nay, said the king with a laugh, one must come first. Art Corn's elder by a full 20 minutes, and his better too. Let's hope, though that's no great mastery. And he looked at Corn with a twinkle in his eyes. But father, couldn't you make whoever you like to be the next king? No, the king's under the law, for it is the law that makes him king. Hast no more power to start away from thy crown than any sentry from his post. Oh dear, said Cor, I don't want to at all, and Corin, I am most dreadfully sorry. I never dreamed my turning up was going to chisel you out of your kingdom. Hooray, hooray, said Corin. I shan't have to be king, I shan't have to be king. I'll always be a prince. Its princes have all the fun. And that's truer than thy brother knows, Cor, said King Lune. For this is what it means to be king. Be first in every desperate attack, and last in every desperate retreat. And when there's hunger in the land, as must be now and then in bad years, to wear finer clothes and laugh louder over a scantier meal than any man in your land. When the two boys were going upstairs to bed, Cor asked again Corin if nothing could be done about it, and Corin said, if you say another word about it, I'll knock you down. It would be nice to end the story by saying that after the two brothers never disagreed about anything again, but I am afraid it would not be true. In reality, they quarreled and fought just as often as any other two boys would, and all their fights ended, if they didn't begin, with Cor getting knocked down. For though they had both grown up and become swordsmen, Cor was the most dangerous man in battle. Neither he nor anyone else in the North Countries could ever equal Corin as a boxer. That was how he got his name of Corin Thunderfist, and how he performed his great exploit against the Lap's bear of Stormness, which was really a talking bear, but it had never gone back to wild bear habits. Corin climbed up to its lair on the Narnian side of Stormness one winter. My gosh, I can finish this. Corin climbed up to its lair on the Narnian side of Stormness one winter day when the snow was on the hills, and boxed it without a timekeeper for 33 rounds, and at the end of it couldn't see out of its eyes and became a reformed character. Aravis also had many quarrels, and I'm afraid even fights with Cor, but they always made it up again, so that years later, when they were grown up, they were so used to quarreling and making it up again, that they got married so as to go on doing it more conveniently. And after King Lune's death, they made a good king and queen of Archenland, and Ran the Great, the most famous of all the kings of Archenland, their son. Bree and Hwyn lived happily to a great age in Narnia, and both got married, but not to one another. And there were many, many months in which one or both of them didn't come trotting over the pass to visit their friends at Anvard. And there weren't many months in which one of them... Okay. Got through it. That's the end of the book. I was struggling there. I'm tired. I hope all of you enjoyed this evening's read. Thank you, peeps, for coming to visit. If you aren't asleep, I hope you have a great night. And we will end the stream now. We'll be back again next Sunday, hopefully at 9 o'clock and not 9:30. Thank you for listening in. Bye-bye.